Chapter 12:10. His condition had finally recovered. However, he wasn't satisfied with the results of his new book and was currently revising it. It was estimated that the revision would be completed in 4 to 5 days. After the revision, the Empress would resume updating 2 chapters. I'm here to inform you in advance so that you won't feel that I'm a eunuch. I'll keep my word. At the same time, he mentioned the new book, Invincible Once You Appear. The female lead of this book was very interesting. As for the male lead, he wasn't bald, not bald, not bald. Not only was he not bald, he even had hair, eyebrows, and a bird's nest. Other than the growth rings on his penis, everything else was perfect. The gigolo of the Empress's family. I'll resume updating 2 chapters in 4 days. Currently typing, please wait for a moment. After the content has been updated, please refresh the page to receive the latest update. Chapter 12:11. Keep your eyes peeled. We have made a big detour and should be near those guys who have been laying traps. Broker was riding on a huge wolf. He was tall and big even among the earth spirits. There was a row of fangs hanging on his chest, and there was a small nail-sized gemstone at the end of each fang. The gemstone was glowing even in the dark night. Whoosh! An arrow that came out of nowhere instantly crossed the distance and nailed a person's head to a tree. Bang! The tree trunk exploded. At this moment, the sound of air exploding could be heard from afar. Enemy! Come out! The broker jumped up from the huge wolf. Deity fist. The broker's chest suddenly collapsed, and his arms seemed to have grown by 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 times and expanded abruptly. His aura rose sharply as well. One could imagine the power of this punch. However, an arrow suddenly appeared in the dark and shot the broker's head. 6 figures dashed into the darkness. As for the earth spirit whose head had exploded first, its broken head recovered after a short while. At this point, the fight had begun in the forest. The Empress shot the broker with 1 arrow and shot 2 more. Then she put the bow on her back, moved her feet, and glided into the darkness. Here! An angry roar came from the darkness in front of her. She waved her claws and tore the air apart. However, the Empress only punched and dispersed all the air in front of her. Then, she somersaulted in the air, flew over the head of the other party, and kicked with her right foot, smashing the head of the other party. I'm too strong. The Empress shook her head. The best way to deal with these high-level earth spirits wasn't to kill them. They could be resurrected countless times until their symbiotic partner used up all their vitality and died. The best way to deal with them was to knock them out. The Empress kicked again and turned the wriggling corpse into a rain of blood. Then, she rushed toward the other earth spirits who heard the commotion. You're just a monster with strength but no ability. The Empress twisted her body a few times in midair and dodged the pincer attack of the 2 men. She smashed one of their heads with her palm and kicked their corpses to pieces. Prolonging their recovery time could also increase the consumption of energy for their resurrection. Then he fought at close range and broke the arms of the other earth spirit. Then he went to his back and punched him lightly. Another light punch, another light punch, another light punch, and another light punch. The 3rd punch finally knocked him out. All of this happened in the time it takes for a spark to fly off a piece of flint. From kicking the other person to knocking the other person unconscious, only 2 breaths of time had passed. After throwing him to the ground, the Empress faced the other 3. First, she smashed one of them into pieces, following which she knocked the other 2 unconscious. It was just enough for her to go back and knock out the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th person. In less than 2 minutes, the 6 people who had entered the forest had stopped breathing. The faces of the 6 earth spirits outside turned pale. It's that woman. Broker already knew who his opponent was. Among the human race, only that woman was not to be trifled with. Even the virtuous king had suffered a great loss at her hands. The question now was whether to enter or retreat. There was almost no need to think about it. Black sky god above, there is no retreat. 15 minutes later, the Empress was sitting on a tree with 12 unconscious earth spirits lying on the ground. Hello. The Empress connected to the radio station. Wake the prince up. After a while, Rinpoche appeared on the other side of the radio station and asked, Your Majesty? I'm fighting for my life outside, yet you are sleeping so soundly. The Empress raised her eyebrows when she heard Rinpoche's voice. Do you want me to fight for my life? Rinpoche chuckled. The Empress immediately lost her temper and said, Forget it. I still have to collect your corpse. Your Majesty, it's so late. Did something happen? Did you meet those earth spirits who came out? 12 of them. They were all knocked out. Your Majesty, you're amazing. You can easily take down the earth spirits. Rinpoche laughed pretentiously. Cut the crap. Although these earth spirits are powerful, they aren't good at fighting. The most troublesome thing is that they can share lives and resurrect many times. On the battlefield, this is an advantage. However, in a fight between experts, it's the biggest weakness. Although you said so, only your majesty can do it, Rinpoche said. After all, the Empress's longevity heaven was superior to these earth spirits in terms of level. Otherwise, she might not have been able to take them down so easily. The Empress shook her head gently. This wasn't a good thing but rather a sad thing. If the human race could have more experts, it wouldn't have been so troublesome. If the human race hadn't been occupied for thousands of years, they wouldn't have been reduced to this state. 12 living, advanced individuals who can share lives with each other. We must bring them back. Where is your majesty's exact location? Rinpoche knew what the current urgent matter was after hearing a few words from the Empress. The Empress reported the location to Rinpoche. Fortunately, when exploring the 60,000 mountains back then, the map that was made had markings similar to latitude and longitude lines. Otherwise, it would have been extremely difficult to find an ordinary location in this vast mountain range. I'm afraid I'll have to trouble your majesty to send these earth spirits to the coordinates 164/337. This is the limit of our helicopter, Rinpoche said after some calculations. This extreme distance, including the extra fuel they brought with them, allowed them to clear most of the cabin when they arrived. 12 earth spirits could fit into the cabin. The Empress looked at the map. This location wasn't far from her, but it didn't feel good to be ordered around like this. After thinking about it, the Empress suppressed her resentment and decided to teach that guy a lesson when she got back. She found some tree vines to tie the 12 earth spirits into a ball and gave each of them a few kicks on the head to ensure that they wouldn't wake up halfway. Then she held a big ball and jumped into the air. After getting her bearings, she headed toward a certain point in the north. At dawn, the Empress stopped at a mountain peak, kicked each of the earth spirits in the head, and waited for the helicopter. She waited from morning to night. Just as the Empress was about to lose her temper, the helicopter finally arrived. Your Majesty. A few aboriginals jumped down from the helicopter and greeted the Empress. I'll leave these guys to you. The Empress pointed to the earth spirit balls that were tied together. Yes. An aboriginal lady took a needle that was as thick as a child's finger and inserted it into the abdomen of an earth spirit. She then forced the liquid in the syringe into his body. This was a strong anesthetic that was made from concentrated castor bean sap mixed with other things. She gave them the highest dose of the drug, which was enough to kill other creatures dozens of times. However, these earth spirits were afraid of everything except death. The Empress looked at them and stepped on a rock at the side, leaving a footprint that was 1 inch deep. That's about the strength. It's just enough to knock them out. If they come back to life halfway, chop off their heads and wait for them to grow back. The Empress knew that these earth spirits would be very useful, so she patiently told the others how to deal with them. Go back and tell the prince to wash his neck and wait for me. The aboriginals were speechless. Didn't he really want to wash his neck and wait for the Empress? The prince was done for. Yes. Chapter 12:12. This is an earth spirit. Rinpoche looked at the tightly bound earth spirit in front of him and carefully sized it up. With so much hair, it should be living in a relatively cold area, at least a temperate zone. There are spring, summer, autumn, and winter seasons, and the summer temperature isn't high. It's about 1.7 meters tall, has a flat and short forehead, and doesn't seem to have a big brain. Rinpoche took a knife from the guard's waist, cut off the top of the earth spirit's head, took a look and dug out its brain to confirm his guess. The area of the cerebral cortex folds was much smaller than that of humans. He then carefully observed this earth spirit to grow a new brain. Rinpoche was curious. If a brain could grow, how could memory be achieved? Unless they had a data platform like a mainframe that backed up everyone's memory at any time. Rinpoche immediately thought of the black sky god. The limbs are short, strong, and slightly curved. The calves and forearms are proportionally small, and the hands and fingers are also short. They haven't evolved to use tools for a long time. It looks like they haven't evolved for a long time and haven't fully evolved. Rinpoche pondered for a while. It was really surprising that they could develop a more developed civilization and perfect language. In addition, the earth spirit's ability to share vitality with other creatures pointed to the black sky god. The guard at the side looked at Rinpoche studying these monsters and said something he didn't understand. After racking his brains for a long time, he could only say, "Damn awesome. Your Highness, you seem to be very knowledgeable about these things. I've long known that you're an extraordinary person who seems to know everything. It seems like it's true after seeing you today. Suyu, who had rushed over, smiled and complimented. Several guards immediately looked at him fiercely. You have already said everything. What are we supposed to say? Rinpoche waved his hand and didn't say much. In order to prevent himself from losing the ability to travel, he engraved countless stone tablets and recorded countless books on the planet in his sea of knowledge. He had read and studied a lot over the years. He might not be able to do scientific experiments. However, he knew a little bit about each side, and he knew quite a lot. In this regard, he was considered an all-rounder even if he returned to Earth. Someone, send them back to the capital and hand them over to the laboratory. He had to be careful on the road. The anesthetic had to be strong. If he showed signs of waking up, he had to cut off his head first. As for their control, everything must be done according to the strictest standards, and there must be no slack in the slightest, Rinpoche instructed. Yes. Rinpoche ordered his men to carry the earth spirit away and clean up the room. After that, he would instruct the laboratory. He had some ideas regarding the research of these earth spirits. Most importantly, there was the secret of sharing life with the Black Sky God. Next, there was the secret of the longevity celestial plane. After all, there were only a few longevity heavens in the entire human race. It would not be good to study them. Finally, there was the weakness of the earth spirits. Fortunately, even though there weren't many earth spirits, they were strong enough to resist. They wouldn't die easily. Moreover, a group of earth spirits were about to set off. After arranging everything, Lu Jun and Suyu went to the yard. Suyu had lost a lot of weight. His chi and blood were full and his eyes were full of spirit. He was completely different from before. If he were to be thrown back to Great Xia now, the people of Great Xia would probably not be able to recognize him. Not bad these days, Rinpoche praised. Your Highness flatters me, I don't deserve it. Suyu waved his hands. He really didn't deserve it. He took medicinal baths every day, drank a bunch of medicine and used crystals. A bunch of people spent a lot of resources to push him to the earth wheel level. How could he dare to face Rinpoche? I didn't expect that I, old Su, would become an earth wheel expert one day. Suyu patted his stomach. Although it had decreased a lot, there was still some left. Maybe there will be a day when I become a spirit wheel expert. Rinpoche laughed. That is also thanks to you, Your Highness. You are a talent, and talents are different from ordinary people. There are always special people in this world, and special people get special treatment. Rinpoche waved his hand. I don't deserve it. Do what you have to do well, and you won't be ashamed. Did you see those monsters just now? They are the enemies of the human race, but they are not the main enemy. The main enemy is still behind. The myriad races, the myriad races. Rinpoche sighed. The myriad races. Just this name alone was like a huge mountain that was hanging over the heads of the human race. For so many years, he had always been worried that this mountain would fall one day and turn the human race into ashes. Your Highness, what you are doing is a matter of life and death for the human race. I will do my best. Suyu quickly said. You can be of some use now, Rinpoche said. Get ready. Follow me to the front line in a few days. Suyu's face suddenly trembled. His entire face was trembling along with the flesh inside. I will write a will. If anything happens to me, I hope that Your Highness will consider my contributions to the human race. Rinpoche wanted to kick him out. How did you survive under Su Qing's hands for so long? Eating, sleeping, and talking nonsense, and I became a marquis. Suyu thought but didn't dare to say it out loud. Although he didn't say it out loud, Rinpoche could see it. He couldn't help but sigh. This person and that person wanted to rob others along the way, but in the end they became emperors. However, that person was really capable. Of course, Suyu was also capable. You won't die. Don't look like that. Rinpoche really didn't like to see his timid appearance. Yes. 2 days later, Rinpoche, Shiwanya, and the others were waiting at the Inchuan airport. When they saw the plane land, they quickly went to greet it. Your Majesty. Everyone greeted. Rinpoche looked directly at the Empress. This time she had been out for a long time. She looked fine, but her clothes were dirty and stained with blood and filth, making her look dirty. His face, on the other hand, was full of heroic spirit, and his eyes were even brighter, sparkling with brilliance as he looked around. Thank you for your hard work, Your Majesty, Rinpoche said in a low voice. You talk too much. I want to take a bath. Quickly arrange it. The Empress said impatiently. Do you want me to accompany you in the bath? The Empress thought for a while before she understood what he meant. She was furious and said, I'll deal with you when I get back. Seeing that the Empress was about to leave, Renbaqian looked in the direction of the plane and saw a group of people getting off it. These were the people who were originally stationed in Aching Valley. Now, all the people had been evacuated and set up a trap for the Earth spirits to step into. A week later, a group of Earth spirits rushed into Aching Valley and only saw a huge abandoned camp. Damn it, those humans ran away again. This place is very big and seems to have stored a lot of resources. It must be very important to those humans. However, they have no choice but to give up this place when facing our army. Check carefully and don't let anything go. Dozens of yellow-skinned mice, which were half the size of a human, were released and smelled everywhere in the camp. Soon, dozens of explosions were heard. An Earth spirit sneered, "Humph, we have seen through the tricks of the humans. Next, we just have to find them and kill them." These days, the humans only dared to harass them with those explosive traps. On the one hand, it made them angry and frustrated. On the other hand, it made them believe that the humans were weak and could only use this method to delay them. Aching Valley was a place that they had to pass through. There were cliffs on both sides. After checking, the Earth Spirit Army advanced toward this place. The scouts who spread out to search found a collapsed cave about 5 kilometers away from Aching Valley. A yellow-skinned mouse sniffed outside the cave and immediately cried out, "Dig it and see what they are hiding." When they dug out the entire cave, they found another collapsed tunnel. Fortunately, the Earth Spirits were good at controlling wild beasts and naturally had creatures that were good at digging tunnels. They dug along this tunnel for a few kilometers before a cave appeared in front of them. "We have dug through. Is this direction toward the human camp? Quickly check it out." When they had followed the tunnel for almost 5 kilometers, several forks suddenly appeared in front of them. On both sides of each fork were many man-made caves. They were so densely packed that they looked like ant nests. As they went further in, they saw many sealed iron buckets in the caves that looked like honeycombs. There were hundreds of them in this fork. There was a sign in front of them. On it was written in the language of the Stainless City, "Safe." Below the 2 words was a skull. "Oh no, go and inform the virtuous king. Tell the army to stop." As soon as they finished speaking, boom. Their consciousness only lingered for a second before it disappeared. First, set a small target. For example, 1 second. Chapter 12-13. Aching Valley was about 1 kilometer wide and 3 kilometers long. A large army was gradually entering and passing through the valley. One could see that there were tigers, leopards, wolves, elephants, eagles, gigantic beasts of disaster, and even winged snakes in this army. Even though they were thousands of kilometers away, it was clear from the video that this army wasn't to be trifled with. When the army entered 1/3 of the way and began to leave the valley, the video suddenly shook and the entire scene was turned upside down. Flames shot out from the ground. This army of various beasts immediately became chaotic. In the face of such a disaster, the beasts completely lost control. In order to escape, the huge saber-toothed tiger slapped the giant snake in front of it away and smashed half of the Earth Spirit's body. After the giant snake fell to the ground, it turned around and bit a huge wolf that crashed into it. The 2 of them fought. However, it didn't take long for both sides to be engulfed by the flames that spewed out from the ground. Ordinary Earth Spirits didn't have the ability to share life. Only Longevity Heaven Earth Spirits could do so. Nearly 10,000 Earth Spirits were turned into ashes in this disaster. There are 30,000 Earth Spirits. Excluding the 1,000 who stayed at the border between the 2 worlds, the 2,000 who died after being taken away by the Sage King, and the 2,000 who were harassed along the way, there are only about 24,000 left. After the incident at Aching Valley, there are only about 15,000 survivors left, the Empress said as she looked at the images on the screen. Not bad. There are 30,000 Earth Spirits with their mounts. They are still powerful but much easier to deal with. Renbaqian laughed. The leader of the Earth Spirit is an impulsive and irritable guy who is indecisive after setbacks. I wonder if he will retreat. No, he won't. He brought a large army here and then retreated without even seeing them. How could he do that? Even if the foreign races are different from us and don't care about their reputation, he at least has to see us. Not to mention, from his previous performance, he isn't someone who doesn't care about his reputation. Renbaqian laughed. Next is Jiao Stream? The Empress got up and looked at the map. Renbaqian nodded and said, "That's right, it's Jiao Ravine. It will take them another half a month to reach there. After this incident, they will be even more anxious and careful. Those who were sent to harass them will continue to be anxious, but they have to be extra careful." Even though those brats aren't afraid of death, they aren't stupid, Shiwanya said. The ancients said, heaven is in harmony, earth is in harmony, and man is in harmony. These long-haired monsters came from a cold place and were not used to the heat and humidity here, so they lost the harmony of the weather. In this mountain range they were not familiar with the terrain, and they did not have a map. The scouting range of the outpost was limited, and they had lost the terrain. We have the heavens and the earth, and we have deployed our army. Once we open up our pockets, we will definitely be able to capture them all in one fell swoop. Suyu was finally acting like a strategist. After saying this, Suyu inwardly nodded. He had to display his skills and leave a good impression on His Majesty. The better he performed, the more secure his life would be. He feared the Empress from the bottom of his heart. In the past few years, countless envoys from various countries had died in the hands of the Empress for no reason. In everyone's eyes, the Empress was a bloodthirsty person with unpredictable moods. Even though he was somewhat useful, he was afraid that the Empress would suddenly find him an eyesore and behead him. Even if that person regretted it in the future, he would still lose his life. At the thought of this, he couldn't help but look at Rinpoche with admiration. People say that being in the king's company is like being with a tiger. This person married a tiger and was still safe and sound. He is really a role model for our generation. We can't capture them all in one fell swoop. If we do, Stainless City will send people. Let them run back. As long as the Sage King feels that he can win, he will go back and proclaim that the human race is strong, but he will not rely on other races. Instead, he will lead the army to avenge his humiliation. This way we can have a few more years. Rinpoche laughed. Your Highness is a strategist and understands people's hearts. I am ashamed of my inferiority, Suyu hurriedly said. Stop flattering me. I know my own capabilities. Rinpoche waved his hand. He knew that he wasn't a genius, and military knowledge wasn't limited to reading 300 military books. The Empress studied the map for a long time before saying, it will take 5 days to reach Jiao Stream at full speed. Let's set off in 5 days. By the way, how's the route you mentioned? We have already established a stronghold here. Rinpoche pointed to a location on the east side of the map. Next, we need to explore and establish strongholds along the way. If everything goes well, we can reach here in 1.5 years. Rinpoche was pointing at the wall of the two worlds. As long as this route is established, it will only take 3 to 4 months to travel from Wangjing to the wall of the two worlds. There's no need to stay in the Qin nation then, the Empress said faintly. If we set off from Yidu, the capital of the Qin nation, we can reduce the time. The Empress's calm and natural tone made Suyu shiver involuntarily. Shiwanya smacked his lips. The entire protectorate of the southeast was about to cheer. In the past few years they had attacked Great Xia from the north, destroyed the Yun nation from the northeast, and leveled Tianjing Basin from the protectorate of the south. Although the protectorate of the center didn't have many outstanding achievements, they had gained a lot of military merits from the war with Great Xia. Only the protectorate of the southeast hadn't made any moves for so many years. There's no need to go through so much trouble. Just borrow a city. Rinpoche laughed. Rinpoche immediately thought of a concession and a free port. He could use this free port to transport a large number of products to the Qin nation. Could be said to be killing 2 birds with 1 stone. Will they be so well behaved? Shiwanya laughed. Your Majesty, you alone can level Yidu. They will be well behaved. Rinpoche laughed. After this war was over, they could just make a trip to the Qin nation. In addition, this is where my brother-in-law went missing. Rinpoche pointed to a spot on the map. The Empress took a deep look at it. Qi Ziding had gone missing there, and it was very likely that the former emperor had disappeared there as well. However, all the detectors that reached the other side of the door were never heard from again. It could be a one-way door, or there could be a huge danger on the other side of the door. Your Majesty can't take any risks before we pacify the various races. I know, the Empress responded. 5 days later, the Empress, Rinpoche, and the rest set off. First, 12 helicopters took them and their mounts to a mountain peak 3,000 kilometers away. It took them another 5 days to reach Jiao Stream. In fact, Jiao Stream was located halfway up the Yiqiao mountain range. Its full name should be Jianuata Stream. Jiao Stream was less than 300 meters wide. There were cliffs on both sides and the mountain path on the other side had been destroyed. Even the mounts of the Earth Spirit race, with the exception of a few flying mounts, couldn't climb up. However, there was a mountain path on their side. There were still 10 days before the arrival of the Earth Spirit race. Chapter 12:14. Jiato Stream was 10 kilometers long, and there was a big city in the direction of the Aboriginals. It looked very big, and even though it could only accommodate 20,000 soldiers, it was prepared beforehand. On the surface this was a human fortress and an important pass, but in reality it wasn't. In order to confuse the Earth Spirit, a lot of manpower was spent to build a big city that could accommodate more than 200,000 people. This was called Guangbai City. In the middle of the city was a pass. In the south, there was a concrete wall that was 20 meters tall and 8 meters thick that had just been built. Behind the wall was a military camp with thousands of soldiers. When he arrived at the small city behind Jiato Stream, Rinpoche received a piece of news. They had found a weakness of the Earth Spirit. Aphrodisiac. The Earth Spirit had strong desires, but their hearts couldn't handle it. Due to their limited brain capacity, their self-control wasn't strong either. A large amount of aphrodisiac could not only overwhelm their hearts, but it could also make them lose their minds. For example, the sap of a tree called sand pole was a strong aphrodisiac. As long as this sap was sprayed on them, they would fall into a state of confusion. When Rinpoche heard this news, he thought about it for 4 hours and finally gave up on this killer weapon. It was still the same reason. After staying in Guangbai City for a day, Rinpoche headed for the pass in front. It was 20 meters tall and 8 meters thick. This pass was considered majestic, but it was like a piece of paper in front of the Earth Spirit army. In front of the calamity beasts, this kind of wall was like a foot. Rinpoche could almost see the scene. Your Majesty, Your Highness. Many of the generals and soldiers were very respectful when they saw them, even if Rinpoche sent them to their deaths. The Empress looked at both sides and asked, "Why don't we bury explosives on the cliffs on both sides? Dig from a distance like last time?" The Empress couldn't help but ask as she looked at both sides. Rinpoche was silent for a while and said softly, "On the surface the cliffs on both sides are as hard as steel and difficult to dig. In fact, we did this to let them know that we are weak and that we relied on some tricks to achieve this. As long as they are careful, we can win next time." The Empress stopped in her tracks. She looked around and didn't say anything. She had agreed to this strategy before, but looking at the people around her, she was still in a bad mood. The two of them stayed here for a day, watching as they reinforced the city walls, planted explosives inside and outside the pass, and watched as they busied themselves in full swing. That night, the two returned to Guangbai City. The next day he saw Li Yuanzhu and Lin Yu. "Let's see if there's anything we can do to help," she said without waiting for him to speak. In fact, Rinpoche already knew about their arrival. Otherwise they wouldn't have come here. This woman, who had once been a heaven's chosen along with the female empress, had long fallen behind. Even with the supply of many origin crystals, she had only reached the initial stage of opening the heaven and earth domain. If she hadn't stayed in Great Xia and gone to the other side of the wall of the two worlds, even if she wasn't as good as the empress, she wouldn't be far behind. However, she didn't seem to mind and continued to endure. Rinpoche had a very good impression of her. It wasn't romantic love. It was a kind of admiration. Others who shed their blood for the human race were worthy of admiration, but she was willing to stay at the rear for the sake of the human race. From the third most powerful expert in the world to the current top 100, she was also worthy of admiration. In addition, Lin Yu had also arrived at the heaven and earth domain. It seemed like her reaction was much faster. 3 seconds later, she smiled gently and said, "So it's your highness. Long time no see. Greetings." "Greetings to both of you." Rinpoche smiled. "First of all, thank you for coming to help." A moment later, Li Yuanzhu saw the empress. Li Yuanzhu took a few deep looks at the empress and couldn't see through her. No one knew if there were any fluctuations in her heart, but her gaze and expression were as calm as ever. However, Lin Yu was online all year round. Upon seeing the empress, she took a few seconds to respond, "Greetings to the Empress of Dayo." At this time, Li Yuanzhu said, "Greetings to the Empress of Dayo. Thank you for the trouble." The empress looked gentle, then looked at Lin Yu and said, "Lin Yu, you look much better." Lin Yu was speechless. 10 seconds later, Lin Yu said, "My mind is much clearer." "That's a good thing." Lin Yu hesitated for another 10 seconds before revealing a mysterious smile. Rinpoche looked at her for a long time and felt that the signal here was poor again. "I wonder where the foreign races are now?" Li Yuanzhu asked. "They will arrive in 3 days. I wonder how strong they are. We will definitely win this battle." Li Yuanzhu was relieved. "I'm here to see the foreign races. I won't refuse if there's anything I can do for you." After a while, Li Yuanzhu began to inquire about the whereabouts of the other people, and Rin Baqin told her about them one by one. Those people were divided into two groups. One group was seizing the time to train outside the Wall of Two Worlds, while the other group was behind the Earth Spirit race. After the battle with the Earth Spirit race, these people would come out from the back and cause trouble for the Earth Spirit race. After that, they would fight against the foreign experts together with the Empress. Seeing that everything was in order, Li Yuanzhu was quite happy. 3 days later, Rin Baqin, the Empress, Shi Huanya, Li Yuanzhu, and the others stood on the mountain pass and looked into the distant sky. They could see a few large birds cruising in the sky. They are here. It wasn't known who said this, but everyone looked solemn. You can go back now. You are in the way here, the Empress said without looking back. The others knew who she was talking about. The dignified Prince of Dayo had become a hindrance here. One had to know that Rin Baqin's prestige in Dayo's imperial court had been increasing over the past 2 years, and his reputation among the people had also increased. However, in front of the Empress he was still a weakling. Li Yuanzhu couldn't help but smile. Thank you for your hard work in this battle. Don't get entangled. As long as you achieve your goal, come back. Rin Baqin cupped his hands at them, turned to look at the surrounding soldiers and said, The imperial court will take care of your parents, wives and children. Thank you, Your Highness. Thousands of soldiers responded with a steel-like voice that carried a murderous aura. We understand. Please go back, Your Highness. Li Yuanzhu nodded in response. Before coming here, Rin Baqin had already warned her, and she knew the meaning of this battle. Rin Baqin looked into the distance again, got off the city wall without looking back, and rode the Crow General back to Guangbi City. As time passed, a line appeared in the distance, and it looked like a flood was surging in this direction. Prepare to meet the enemy. Defend the nation with your body. The soldiers shouted and drew their swords. Even the mountain-like giant beast in front of them, which was squeezed into the Pintu stream and moving toward them, couldn't make them waver. The enemy didn't stop at all, and 2,000 vanguards flooded toward the mountain pass. The first to explode were the cliffs on both sides. The iron content of the mountain walls here was extremely high, so the explosives weren't buried deep. Although a lot of rubble was blown off, not many enemies were killed. Kill. The earth spirit in front bared his fangs and urged the beast he was riding on to pounce. Shoot. Chapter 12:15. Shoot horizontally. Although everyone was puzzled, they still followed the Empress's instructions. The bows that were originally aimed at the sky turned to the front. Facing the oncoming army, the Empress stood on top of the wall and took a deep breath like a dragon sucking in water. The air in the entire Jiato stream surged, and a gale surged into the stream from above before sweeping toward the Empress. Shoot. Shi Huanya immediately ordered when he saw the Empress make a gesture. Buzz. Thousands of bows shot out at the same time, and the air vibrated. Ha! The Empress opened her mouth and exhaled. Suddenly, a gale filled the sky and boosted the speed of the arrows. The thousands of arrows were more than twice as fast in the wind. Pft! The sound of arrows piercing through flesh rang out incessantly. Li Yuanzhu looked at the Empress, who was not far away, and was shocked. This inhale and exhale could be said to have changed the weather. Even so, there were still very few earth spirits who fell. Roar! How! All kinds of beasts roared incessantly, and figures pounced toward the top of the city wall. Get lost! The Empress waved her sleeves and swept a large number of earth spirits down. Most of them vomited blood in the air, and their bones were broken. An inconspicuous wooden sword appeared in Li Yuanzhu's hand. She leaped into the midst of the enemy, and with a wave of her hand, the earth spirits and their mounts were sent flying. Li Yuanzhu stabbed the sword into the ground, and the earth spirits within a 100-meter radius felt their bodies sink as if they had fallen into a quagmire. Li Yuanzhu waved her sleeves and swept away the enemies within a 100-meter radius. She moved nimbly like a swimming fish, and none of the earth spirits within a 100-meter radius could get close to her. She stood there like a reef in a torrent, forcing the torrent to part on both sides. A low flute sounded, sometimes desolate and sometimes heroic. The earth spirits under the wall held their heads and screamed. Their skin turned red and soon their heads exploded. Retreat! A roar came from the vanguard of the earth spirit race, and a figure pounced toward Li Yuanzhu, who had become a reef in the torrent. Bang! She took a step back, but her opponent followed up with another punch. Li Yuanzhu's beautiful eyes flickered. She already knew the actual situation of these earth spirits, so she didn't fight him head-on. She twisted her body and went to his side. Her left hand pressed him down, and the back of her right hand slapped his waist 3 times in a flash. Boom. The figure smashed into the sea of people, leaving a trail of blood. As expected, although his strength and speed are enough, his combat skills are shallow, and his combat ability is not high. He's like a child holding a sharp weapon, Li Yuanzhu thought to herself. If it had been someone else, their internal organs would have been crushed after being whipped 3 times. However, the figure somersaulted on the ground and leaped dozens of meters in a single leap. However, it was even worse than the last time. She grabbed his leg and threw him into the distance. Ah! The figure roared in anger and crawled up again. Very quickly he was sent flying for the 3rd time. However, this kind of injury was almost non-existent to the high-level earth spirits who had reached the longevity heaven. Li Yuanzhu acted as a reef in the torrent and greatly slowed down the speed of the earth spirit's vanguard. The Empress waved her sleeves at the top of the city wall and swept the earth spirits off their feet. Lin Yu pressed her flute against her red lips and played an unknown song. The heads of the people at the foot of the city wall exploded one after another. It was like setting off firecrackers. Red and white heads flew everywhere. With the help of the other Aboriginal soldiers, even if they were 4-way heaven-level soldiers, the weakest among the earth spirits was at the Kismet heaven level, and the captain was at the cardinal heaven level. However, with so many arrows, some of them could be killed. After all, the earth spirits in the longevity heaven realm didn't have the ability to share life and not fear death. In less than 30 minutes, the earth spirits at the foot of this mountain pass had a huge bump on their heads. Nearly half of the 2,000 vanguard soldiers were killed. At this moment, a shocking roar was heard from afar. The mountain-like calamity beast roared angrily at the sky and charged in their direction. You have a bad memory? The Empress snorted and went to meet it. However, dozens of figures rushed out of the enemy's formation like lightning. Li Yuanzhu turned to look at the earth spirits, who had begun to rush up the city wall after the Empress left, and sighed softly. She looked up at the figures rushing over, pulled her wooden sword out of the ground, and turned into a blue shadow as she went to meet them. Lin Yu's flute stopped abruptly. She looked to her left and right and said, "Take care." "Thank you." A burly man who looked like a general laughed. "Boys, fight to the death. Fight to the death." Many aboriginals on the city wall roared with weapons in their hands. When Lin Yu went to support Li Yuanzhu, a sea of blood immediately appeared on the city wall. The general who had laughed earlier waved his saber to block the sharp claws of the saber-toothed tiger, causing it to fall off the wall. However, a wolf jumped up from the side and bit off the head of an aboriginal. The person beside him cut the stomach of the wolf in half with his saber and was beheaded by the mount on his back. Not far away, 3 aboriginals were entangled by a giant snake. All their bones were broken, and they used the last of their strength to slash the head of the snake with their sabers. However, they only managed to break off a scale. The general roared, chopping the knight on the giant wolf's back in half with a backhand strike, and then slicing off the giant wolf's head. However, his body suddenly stopped, a barbed tail sticking out from his chest. The general grinned, and blood seeped out from the gaps between his teeth. He felt that the tail was about to fling him away, so he immediately grabbed the end of the tail protruding from his chest and slashed it down. The beast behind him roared, and the general fell from the top of the city wall with a big hole in his chest. The moment he fell, he threw his saber out and nailed the earth spirit on the back of the lizard-like beast to the wall. The aboriginals were 1 level higher than the soldiers of Great Xia and the Yun Nation, and their average strength was at the 4-way heaven realm. The earth spirits were 1 level higher than the aboriginals, and their average strength was at the Kismet heaven realm. The aboriginals had to pay 10 times the casualties in exchange for the life of an earth spirit. Needless to say, the beasts were fiercer, sharper, and more powerful than the earth spirits. Battle cries and roars resounded from the top of the city wall, but they were gradually replaced by the roars of the beasts. Broken limbs and blood were everywhere. The 3,000 aboriginals became corpses under the attack of the earth spirit vanguard in less than 30 minutes. Of the 1,000 vanguard, 800 were left. Including the mounts, there were 1,700 of them. 200 of the earth spirit vanguard died, but only 100 of the mounts died. The Empress smashed the upper body of the Sage King with a punch. She turned around, caught the arm with her left hand and kicked out. Except for the arm, the Sage King's entire body exploded. Feeling the wind behind her, the Empress didn't stop. She appeared in the air and slapped down with her right hand. It was as if an invisible palm had slapped down from the sky. The few earth spirit experts who jumped up with the Empress were all slapped down. The Empress took the opportunity to look at the pass, only to see a sea of blood and the beasts eating. She raised her eyebrows and looked at the Earth Spirit experts below with a murderous look in her eyes. However, more than a dozen experts leaped into the air and threw punches and kicks at the Empress. All of a sudden, the Empress was completely surrounded. However, as the Empress's body spun like a spinning top, she punched out in all directions. After a series of explosions and crashing sounds, her punches flew toward the Earth Spirits who had fallen in all directions. However, just as she repelled the Earth Spirits, a huge black eagle swooped down from the sky. She turned around and repelled it, but another wave of flames came at her. Behind the flames were 7 or 8 Earth Spirit experts. The Empress knew that if she continued to waste time here, she would be killed by them sooner or later. Although the Earth Spirits weren't strong, there were too many of them and they wouldn't die easily. Her figure flashed a few times in the air and appeared beside Li Yuanzhu. The third most powerful expert in the world was missing half a sleeve, there was a trace of blood at the corner of her mouth, and she couldn't move half of her shoulder. Only her eyes were as calm as before. Let's go. The Empress repelled the surrounding Earth Spirits, threw Li Yuanzhu out, and threw Lin Yu out of the battle circle before leaving. When she passed the pass, she rushed to the top of the city wall to vent her anger, sending a rain of corpses flying. Chapter 12:16. Don't chase them. Seeing that the other Earth Spirits were about to chase, the Sage King stopped them. He had suffered a lot when he chased after the woman in red. Now he understood the meaning of don't chase a cornered enemy. The Sage King was quite satisfied with this battle. He didn't kill thousands of humans, but he finally met them instead of being led by the nose. The ground shook when the giant disaster beasts walked. In a short while they arrived at the pass. The Sage King looked at the blood flowing down from above with a satisfied expression. These humans are so weak. Except for a few strong ones, the rest are like ants. They can't even withstand a single blow. The Sage King laughed. The others also agreed. In fact, even though everyone's attention was on the Empress during the battle just now, they had also been paying attention to the situation here after the battle. These humans looked brave, but they couldn't even withstand a single blow. These humans were extremely weak, not much different from the stronger ones among the lower races. In fact, they weren't even as strong as the top lower races. Back then, the humans were also very weak. But the upper limit of their strong ones was very high. Plus, they reproduced so quickly that they became a medium race, an Earth Spirit said. That takes time. Only a few strong ones can emerge from a large number of humans. After being exiled for so many years, the humans have already declined. They don't have time to develop again. Sage King, there's a big human city after this valley. It looks like it can accommodate hundreds of thousands of people. Let's see where you can run this time. The Sage King laughed. They finally found them. Should we go after them? No hurry. They can't run away, the Sage King said. How far are we from the human city? A moment later there was news, only a dozen miles, 7 or 8 kilometers. They could reach it in a snap of their fingers. How many satiety pills do we have? 3 for each of us. The fullness pill was a special kind of food that the Earth Spirit clan used when they were traveling. Along the way, the Earth Spirit clan's army couldn't even find a mouse within 100 miles. They had all been turned into rations, and with the fullness pill, they had managed to survive until now. Everyone take one and rest here. We'll start the battle in 2 hours. The Sage King thought for a while. Let the scouts continue forward to investigate. The terrain here is narrow. Those humans must have set up traps. Every Earth Spirit had a deep memory of the human clan's explosive traps. Contrary to the human clan's weak strength, these explosive traps were a headache for the Earth Spirits. He immediately sent out the scouts. They've stopped. There were cameras everywhere in the Pintu stream. The humans could see everything that happened to the Earth Spirit clan. Ren Baqin looked at the screen. The Earth Spirit was resting outside the pass, and many ferocious beasts ran up to the pass to feed on the corpses. He could feel the Empress beside him tensing up and unable to restrain her anger. Don't worry, they will pay the price soon. Ren Baqin grabbed the Empress's hand, but he didn't expect her to break free. After all, this strategy was proposed by Ren Baqin. Ren Baqin didn't mind. After all, he felt uncomfortable. However, it was precisely these corpses that covered up the traces and smell of the buried explosives. The explosives and iron fragments that could cause great damage were buried under the pass and behind it. On the contrary, there were no explosives in front of Guangbi City. If the cliffs on both sides collapsed, the 20,000 soldiers in Guangbi City would be buried with them. Rinpoche looked at the scene in front of him, especially the three giant beasts. They were more than 100 meters tall and 30 meters wide. They were terrifying. Can we think of a way to keep these beasts here? Rinpoche asked. The Earth Spirit clan only had a small victory and would soon be defeated. Rinpoche was thinking about the spoils of war. He was also very interested in these giant beasts. It was hard to imagine that a terrestrial creature could be so huge. Giant elephants that were more than 10 to 20 meters tall were already terrifying to him. These giant beasts were really like mountains. The Empress crossed her arms and said, "The aura of this thing is probably at the intermediate level of longevity heaven, but its strength and vitality are far superior to ordinary creatures. It will be very difficult to keep it intact." "As long as it is alive," Rinpoche said. "At least it can be used for research." Then cut off its limbs. It sounded simple, but the Empress was the only one who could do it. Rinpoche looked for a moment, picked up the walkie-talkie and asked, "Have you arrived?" "Just outside Jiado Stream." "Good. When the explosion sounds, you will charge in from the back and entangle their experts. Also be careful of falling objects." After switching off the radio, Rinpoche strode out of the door. In the square inside the city wall, more than 500 160 caliber mortars had been set up densely. Thousands of people were busy working, and many of them were familiar faces such as Tong Lan and other doctoral students as well as some researchers. Mortars weren't complicated. Even a 160 caliber mortar could be used by 2 aboriginals. However, the shells this time were a little different. All the shells were produced by Dayo. They used a type of homemade explosive with the addition of crystal powder. It was named Yuan 1 explosive, and its explosive power was much greater than that of TNT. It was 3 times that of TNT of the same weight. Previously, the Research Institute was conducting research on diversifying the use of crystals, especially in weapons. This kind of explosive was one of the results of the research. The explosive itself wasn't very powerful, but the crystal powder could increase the power of the explosion by 10 times. Although they had conducted many explosive experiments before, this was the first time they were used in actual combat. "Dean?" Shurgan looked up and wiped his sweat when he saw Rinpoche walking over. Many students still like to call Rinpoche Dean. "Are you all ready?" "I've tested it and there's no problem. Let those monsters see how powerful you are in a while." Rinpoche patted him on the shoulder. Each shell weighed 50 kilograms and had the power of a low-level Cardinal Heaven expert. More importantly, it had fragmentation damage. As long as there were enough shells, even a top-level Cardinal Heaven expert wouldn't be spared. For this battle, 10,000 shells had been prepared. In fact, if Rinpoche wanted to, he could totally make a 300 caliber mortar that was much more powerful than the current one. Even a top-level Cardinal Heaven expert wouldn't be able to withstand 2 shots. However, it was still because of that reason that Rinpoche produced a large number of these small mortars for transitional purposes. Rinpoche was watching everyone check the situation of the mortars when he heard someone shout from behind, "They are moving." Rinpoche raised his head abruptly and said, "Someone send them to the previously arranged hiding place. We want to see the effects of the weapons." Tong Lan shouted. "Go back and watch the video." No one knew what would happen in a while. These students were the treasures that he had nurtured for so many years. If they were injured, he would cry to death. In a few steps, he reached the bottom of the city wall. When he reached it, the Empress was already there. An explosion could be heard in the distance. When he knew that there was a large human city ahead, King Xian had already decided to let the giant calamity beasts break through the city. The 2 giant calamity beasts lined up at the front and strode forward. The concrete pass under their feet was like a building block that collapsed in an instant. After them were countless ferocious beasts and the Earth Spirit people. However, the giant calamity beasts passed through safely. When 1/3 of the army behind them passed, there was a sudden loud noise from Jiado Stream. The entire ground was shaking and countless flames shot up from the ground. Countless people were overturned by this violent vibration, and thousands of Earth Spirit people and their mounts were torn apart in an instant. Chapter 12:17. The Sage King on the Disaster Beast heard the explosion and turned his head to look. He saw spray-painted flames everywhere, the cracked ground, and broken limbs flying everywhere. He was instantly enraged. As long as they turned a corner, they would arrive at a human city. But now they had fallen into a human trap. With a quick glance, he knew that there were at least 2,000 or 3,000 casualties. The rest were also stopped by the sudden explosion. There was even a commotion. The Earth Spirit could control the situation, but the beasts still had their instincts. The fact that they hadn't escaped after such an explosion proved that the Earth Spirit had good control. "Spread out. Charge forward and crush the humans," the Sage King shouted. Regardless of whether there were other traps along the way, they had to charge forward. Besides, the smell of traps had been covered by the blood and bodies. There was little chance that there would be more traps after that. The Sage King didn't stop after he gave the order. He drove the beast forward and reached the corner in an instant. He could see Guangbi City in front of him. The Sage King immediately saw the woman in red standing on the city wall, as well as the two women who had stopped the experts of the Earth Spirit clan. "Kill them," the virtuous king roared. The calamity beasts began to charge forward. "Are there only women in the human race?" the Sage King mocked. From the beginning to the end, the 3 human cultivators he had seen were all women. The Empress raised her eyebrows. Not many people dared to talk to her like that. Even fewer dared to talk to her because she was a woman. She curled her finger and the longbow on her back appeared in her hand. 3 arrows shot out like meteors toward the mountain-like beast of disaster. All 3 arrows hit the same leg and a large piece of flesh was blown up. "Ha!" The Sage King jumped up and went straight to the top of the city wall. He raised his arms above his head and started to grow bigger and thicker. His arms expanded several times in an instant, revealing the black iron-like muscles under his long hair. Tianxin fist. Then a violent force came crashing down from the sky. It was like an invisible meteorite. The huge pressure was felt even before it reached the ground. The Empress jumped into the air without thinking and punched. Boom. It was almost as powerful as the explosion of a nuclear bomb. Under the punch, the entire Guangbi city was swept up by a strong wind. Even the mortars in the square were a little unstable. The Empress's body suddenly sank, and she fell more than 10 meters before she stomped on the air and rushed up again. However, the Sage King also smashed down with his fist. The Empress furrowed her eyebrows. If it was in the past, it would have been fine to directly avoid it, but at this moment, Guangbi City was right below her. This was the disadvantage of fighting on one's own side. However, this punch of the Sage King was hurried and the power was much weaker. After blocking another punch, the Empress got close to the Sage King. She spun her body in the air and kicked him dozens of times in a row. The Sage King barely managed to block more than a dozen kicks before he was kicked onto the city wall. Following that, he suffered an unknown number of kicks until his upper body was almost unrecognizable as a human. He was heavily slammed onto the mountain wall. The female Empress dashed over in a flash and smashed King Xian into pieces of flesh and blood. Then she stepped on the air and faced the dozen or so experts from the Earth Spirit clan. "Please stop those 2 beasts of disaster," Ren Baqin said to Li Yuanzhu. "All right." At this moment, Lin Yu didn't have any bad network signal and rushed out of the city with Li Yuanzhu without saying a word. "Prepare the mortars." Ren Baqin looked at the corner of the mountain wall where the Earth Spirit clan's army could be seen and immediately waved his hand. "First team fire." Bang. In an instant, the sound of countless cannons converged into a few sounds. A series of sharp and ear-piercing whistles sounded in the sky. The Earth Spirit clan had just turned the corner when they heard the whistles in the sky. They looked up and saw hundreds of black dots falling from the sky like rain. At first, the Earth Spirit clan didn't pay much attention, but when these black dots landed on the ground and exploded into balls of fire, it directly plowed the area from the corner to 300 meters in the direction of Guangbi City. Only a few hundred of the Earth Spirit clan's army that had rushed over were left, and they rushed toward Guangbi City with ferocious looks on their faces. Ren Baqin frowned. "Second team fire. Fire-breathing team get ready. Throw team get ready to ignite." At Ren Baqin's command, hundreds of people around him carried a long pipe, and the other end of the pipe extended to the oil storage tanks below the city wall. Third team fire. Fourth team fire. The mortars plowed the corner over and over again, and the explosions and flames basically didn't stop. The shrapnel turned the area into a dead zone, and countless Earth Spirit clan members who rushed into that area were blown to pieces. Even a supreme being would find it difficult to resist such a heavy artillery fire in such a narrow space. Even so, a few supreme being Earth Spirits and their mounts still rushed out. The hundreds of Earth Spirits that had rushed over were already 500 meters away from the city. Throw team 300 meters in front, fire. Hundreds of oversized long-handled grenades immediately covered a distance of 300 meters outside the city wall. There was another violent explosion. In order to increase their power, these grenades were more than twice the size of the grenades on Earth. They chose grenades instead of hand grenades because such a large hand grenade was difficult to hold with one's palm. Only grenades were convenient to throw. Rinpoche stared at the flames and smoke in front of him. When the first figure passed through the smoke, Rinpoche quickly gave an order. Fire-breathing team, fire. Fire-breathing team, first team, fire. The other teams are free to fire after loading. He didn't need to observe the Earth Spirit clan in the distance anymore because the experts behind should be rushing over. The Jiato stream, which was more than 10 kilometers long, was only a 3-minute journey for the longevity heaven experts. On the contrary, the people below the city wall were a great threat, even though there were only a few dozen Earth Spirits. Coupled with the Earth Spirits rushing over from behind, the entire battlefield seemed rather sparse. Those who were rushing over were at least Supreme Being Heaven experts. Phew. With the sound of high-pressure oil guns being fired, the area 100 meters in front of the city wall immediately turned into a sea of fire. The Earth Spirit experts, who were already very close to the city wall with endless murderous intent in their eyes, could only see the oncoming flames. Figures stepped on their mounts and leaped toward the top of the city wall. Get lost. Go down. Shiwanya immediately waved his long saber, creating a snow-white waterfall. Along with him were the experts recruited by the Protectorate of the South over the past few years. Figures collided in the air with angry shouts and weapons clashing. When the two sides separated, almost all the Earth Spirit experts were smashed into the sea of fire below. Rinpoche observed the situation of the battle. So far, everything had been going smoothly. Mortars, grenades, and flamethrowers were enough to exhaust the enemy to death on this road. These Earth Spirits could only touch the edge of the city wall at most. Looking up into the distance, he saw that the number of mortars raining down on them seemed to have decreased, and the land that had been plowed over and over again was no longer recognizable. At this moment, the sound of explosions decreased a lot, and there seemed to be a large gap in the rain of bullets. Instead, there were sporadic explosions on the mountain wall. Rinpoche focused his eyes, picked up his binoculars and looked into the distance. Only then did he realize that many of the shells were shot by arrows in the air and fell toward the mountain wall. These shells were fused and would only explode when the front end collided with an object. They wouldn't explode if they were shot from the side. As the Earth Spirit found a way? Rinpoche's heart skipped a beat, but this was also within his expectations. Even the godly archers of Great Xia could shoot grenades onto the city wall, let alone the stronger Earth Spirit. As the explosion suddenly decreased, Rinpoche saw a large group of Earth Spirits rushing in from the rear. Adjust the angle and blanket the area, Rinpoche ordered again. A new round of bombardment began. This time they changed their position and attacked Guangbi City from the corner according to the previous grouping. After a round of bombardment, the number of Earth Spirits that rushed over was reduced by half. However, the other half also rushed out of the area covered by the vitality. Throw team 300 meters in front, throw. When they finally managed to charge past the Earth Spirits, who had been plowed by the cannonballs, they were greeted by another round of grenades. However, no matter how many Earth Spirits rushed over this time, there were still 500 of them left. Suyu? Rinpoche shouted coldly. With such a big difference in strength, they definitely won't miss. Suyu's face was pale from the earth-shattering battle, and his legs were trembling as he spoke in a trembling voice. Set a small target first, such as 1 second. Remember, booksellers. Chapter 12:18. Since the beginning of the battle, Suyu had been sweating all over and trembling like a sieve. The fact that he could still stand here was already a testament to his courage. The ferocious Earth Spirit race, the flames everywhere, and the explosions in the distance were completely different from the wars he had participated in. Even though he already knew about it, it still made him feel like he was going to explode when he witnessed it. In Great Xia, the Man-Wheel experts were already squad leaders, and the Earth-Wheel experts were already experts. The current battlefield was completely different from the current one. The people of Great Xia and most of the Dayo people didn't expect such a war to take place on the other side of the world. This scene had already exceeded the imagination of most people. Looking at another group of foreign races charging up, Suyu quickly shouted, "The difference in strength is so great. They definitely won't miss their target." After he finished speaking, Suyu didn't feel anything. After all, he was also an Earth-Wheel expert now, and there weren't many Earth Spirits rushing over. However, those Earth Spirits had bloodthirsty and ferocious looks on their faces. They jumped onto the city wall from 100 meters away, and their mounts fell into the sea of fire. However, the earth spirits couldn't care less. Otherwise, they wouldn't even have the chance to jump onto the city wall. The mounts that accompanied them day and night fell into the sea of fire and screamed. This made many earth spirit soldiers feel as if their hearts were being cut by knives. Their murderous intent soared to the sky, and they couldn't wait to slaughter all the humans to vent their hatred. While still in the air, they brandished their sabers and slashed down. The sabers cut into human bodies, broke bones, and sprayed blood. These familiar sensations and sounds didn't appear. There was only the uniform sound of the sabers slicing through the air. The bloodthirsty faces froze for a moment. No one knew what exactly happened. They clearly saw people slashing at them, but they missed. It was as if everyone's senses were playing tricks on them. However, before they could figure out what exactly happened, they saw several sabers slashing at them from all directions. Before they could react, they were killed by the sabers. At this time, there were 2,000 ordinary Aboriginal soldiers and 1,000 Kismet Heaven Aboriginal elites on top of the city wall. These elites were similar in strength to the ordinary Earth Spirit soldiers, but their combat skills were much better than those of the Earth Spirit soldiers. They had a high chance of winning even one-on-one, let alone fighting in numbers. After a round of fighting and miserable cries, the first wave of Earth Spirits who had jumped onto the city wall were hacked to death. When they looked up, they saw dozens of people jumping over. When they saw the situation at the top of the city wall, their pupils immediately shrank, as if a bucket of cold water had been poured over their heads. However, they didn't have a choice. Below them were raging flames, and in front of them were thousands of Aboriginal soldiers who were preparing to make dumpling fillings. Most of the Earth Spirit clan soldiers realized that they had no chance of survival. They twisted their bodies in the air with ferocious looks in their eyes, trying to land near those fire-spewing tubes. However, they were all chopped down in the air. The rest of them barely managed to climb up the wall, but as soon as the sabers slashed down, they began to doubt their lives. Even cutting a pipe crooked? He was clearly under the saber, but after one strike he realized that he was 3 steps away? The Aboriginal soldiers were also a little confused. Why were these long-haired monsters slashing at the air? It was the same for the previous ones, and it was the same for the current ones. Did the long-haired monsters have poor eyesight? Rinpoche didn't look at the fighting around him. He was dressed in ordinary clothes and looked no different from an ordinary soldier. On the battlefield, whoever wore flashy clothes would die faster. Although he was a little cowardly, Rinpoche wasn't a frontline combatant. At this moment he was still standing at the top of the city wall, which attracted many people's attention. Rinpoche looked into the distance. There were fewer and fewer cannonballs falling to the ground. Most of them were shot into the mountain walls in the air. Occasionally, 2 cannonballs would hit the mountain walls and explode. A large group of Earth Spirit clan members charged over from the corner. When the Earth Spirit clan arrived at Jiato Stream, there were close to 15,000 of them. They had suffered 1,200 casualties at the pass, and another 2,000 were killed by the explosions. Just now, they were forced to bombard the area and suffered heavy casualties. However, there were still close to 8,000 of them, and the number of mounts would double. Their strength had far surpassed the Aboriginal army in Guangbai City. If they were to charge over, the city would be destroyed in an instant. Many people looked past the flames and at the Earth Spirit clan's army in the distance, which was like a beast tide. Even the Aboriginals couldn't help but feel thirsty at this moment, and they held their sabers tightly. "Your Highness." The guard couldn't help but remind Rinpoche, "You should withdraw. There's no hurry." Rinpoche's expression didn't change as he ordered, "Let the artillery team speed up." "But it's getting less and less effective," the guard said. The guard looked anxious as well. At this moment, chaos suddenly broke out among the Earth Spirit clan's army. The number of cannonballs falling to the ground suddenly increased, and a large area of flames and smoke exploded. "They are finally here." Rinpoche's mouth twitched. In fact, it had only been a few minutes since the beginning. If it were an ordinary army, it would be considered good if they could advance 200 meters in a few minutes. However, these Earth Spirits and ferocious beasts were too strong and too fast. If it weren't for the bombardment earlier, they would have covered a dozen miles in just a few minutes and bathed the entire Guangbai city in blood. Rinpoche raised his binoculars and saw more than a dozen figures stirring up a sea of blood behind the Earth Spirit clan. Broken limbs flew everywhere, and a large amount of blood rained down at almost every moment. Nearby, Li Yuanzhu and Lin Yu were flying around 2 huge calamity beasts. Compared to the huge calamity beasts, they were like 2 flies. If it weren't for the fact that they were mainly targeting the eyes and noses of the calamity beasts, ordinary wounds wouldn't have been felt by the huge beasts. Li Yuanzhu ran from the back of a calamity beast to its head. With a shake of the wooden sword in her hand, more than a dozen sword shadows shot out and slashed at the nose of the calamity beast. A group of huge claws slapped at the lively little mosquito on its head. Li Yuanzhu scuttled to the nose of the calamity beast. The wooden sword grew larger and larger until it was several times the size of the previous one. She pierced the eye of the calamity beast. If it hit, it would definitely be blinded. The calamity beast closed its eyes and shook its head rapidly. Its front claws, which covered the sky and covered the sun, swatted at its nose like it was swatting a fly. It hated this little insect to death. It was too annoying. Bang! The calamity beast slapped its nose hard, causing its movements to stagnate for a moment. At this moment, a figure suddenly descended from the sky and hit the head of the calamity beast with a short stick. To the calamity beast, this small wound wasn't even comparable to a mosquito's stab. It was just like how Li Yuanzhu couldn't create a wound on the body of the calamity beast even with all her strength. However, this seemingly powerless stick hit the head of the calamity beast. The strong skull that it was so proud of immediately cracked and a big hole appeared. However, there was still a hard bone underneath. The skull of the calamity beast was at least 1 meter thick. Without thinking, Li Fu jumped into the hole and hit the skull with the stick again. 3 times in a row, it was as if a fountain of blood had appeared under Li Fu's feet and almost sent him flying into the sky. In an instant, Li Fu grabbed the broken bone wall beside him to stabilize himself. He took a deep breath and plunged his head into the wound. Chapter 12-19. The appearance of Li Fu and the other reinforcements immediately threw the Earth Spirit race into chaos. More than 50 longevity heaven experts could be said to be a force that could change the situation of the war at this time. The Empress alone blocked King Xian and more than 20 Earth Wheel experts, and she also had to suppress them so that they couldn't attack Guangbai City. The Empress couldn't even be seen in the sky, and all the Earth Spirit experts could see was their bodies exploding as soon as they recovered. The Empress had fought with them for so long, and she had always attacked them secretly. Even when she appeared, she would immediately retreat after one attack. She had never fought with them for such a long time. King Xian and the other Earth Spirits knew that she was very strong and was the strongest in the human race, but they didn't know how strong she was until now. King Xian was also at the top of longevity heaven, which was similar to the Empress. However, he didn't even have a chance to fight back. She alone suppressed King Xian and more than 20 Earth Spirit experts. However, King Xian wasn't worried because this woman couldn't kill them. Apart from her, there were only a few strong humans, and they couldn't stop the army of the Earth Spirit race. Even though the ground behind him was plowed by the artillery countless times, he never worried and focused all his attention on the Empress. It wasn't until a giant beast of disaster let out a miserable howl and its mountain-like body fell to the ground that everyone realized something was wrong. A figure jumped out from the head of the giant beast of disaster, and in the blink of an eye, it jumped to the head of another giant beast. More than 10 lines of blood appeared at the back of the army. Then, more than 10 figures fell from the sky into the middle of the charging army, causing a lot of chaos. King Xian, who noticed this, was surprised that the human race still had so many strong people. Although they were only at the beginning of the longevity heaven level, and seriously speaking there weren't many of them, and King Xian had brought several times more experts than the other side, they were still a decisive force on the battlefield. When he was distracted, he realized that the Empress in front of him had disappeared, but it was already too late. A huge force hit his head and only half of his body was left. However, after a while, King Xian recovered again. He glanced at the position of the Empress and looked at the situation around him. There were fewer explosions. Every time a large number of explosives fell, hundreds of people jumped into the air and kicked them aside. In this way, the experts who were aiming for the archers became useless. However, the flames under the city wall were still burning, and the tribesmen were forced to jump to the top of the city wall from 100 meters away. To an ordinary Earth Spirit with a Kismet Heaven's strength, a leap of 100 meters was still an insurmountable distance. Almost all of them used mounts of similar strength as stepping stones. Even so, most of them still fell into the sea of fire. Even if some of them managed to reach the top of the city wall, they were already at the end of their rope. They were hacked to death the moment they reached the top of the city wall. In this way, it was like adding oil to the city wall. A small number of Earth Spirits were killed before they could even stand firm on the city wall. The Sage King suddenly felt resentful. After leading an army of 30,000 for 2 years, there were only a few thousand left, and they couldn't even climb the city walls of the human race. If they didn't destroy the enemy's wall, the rest of the clansmen would probably die here. How could he accept this? The Sage King took a deep breath. He took out a black crystal and crushed it. It was the road sign he had brought with him. He shouted, "Black Heaven God, your descendants and people are calling for you. We're willing to offer you blood and flesh, spirit and soul, past and future. Please help me to defeat this enemy." As soon as he finished speaking, the Sage King's body withered. His chi and blood exploded from the surface of his body and gushed into the sky. From afar it looked like a pale red pillar connecting him in the sky. The Sage King's aura was declining rapidly. At this moment, a mirror suddenly appeared behind the Sage King. A whip lashed out from the mirror and pierced into the Sage King's heart like a spear. It was one of the reinforcements who had been waiting for the right time to attack. After all, the Sage King was at the top of the immortal level. No matter how weak his combat ability was, he couldn't be compared to beginner-level and intermediate-level people who could open up the sky and earth. The Sage King was overjoyed when he succeeded. A pretty girl's face appeared in the mirror. However, her expression changed as she looked up. A terrifying aura appeared in the sky above Guangbai City. The faces of the people in Guangbai City changed drastically. Everyone felt as though the sky was falling on their heads. "Retreat. Quick." The Empress felt the terrifying pressure from the sky and her voice was immediately transmitted to the top of Guangbai City. Ren Baqin jumped down the city wall without hesitation. The aura was too terrifying and couldn't be withstood by anyone. If the Empress's aura was like a mountain, this aura was like a violent thundercloud that couldn't be resisted. Before Ren Baqin landed on the ground, he was grabbed by a big hand and dragged away at a speed that was 10 times faster than Ren Baqin's. Ren Baqin couldn't care less about who grabbed him. He turned his head and looked at the sky. He was shocked to see a black hole in the sky and a huge, hideous, greenish-black palm stretched out from it. At first, it was only a few dozen meters in radius. However, what was surprising was that the palm grew bigger and bigger. It was 3 kilometers in radius and slammed down with a terrifying aura. Boom. With just one palm, the entire city wall disappeared. There wasn't even a flying gravel. It was pressed directly into the ground. The oil storage tanks behind the city wall that were used to store diesel exploded. When the palm was raised, it turned into a sea of fire. Ren Baqin's eyes widened. This hand was too terrifying. Was the owner of this hand the so-called Black Sky Deity? Although he already knew about the Black Sky Deity and that the Empress had injured his hand with a nuclear bomb, he only understood how terrifying it was after seeing it with his own eyes. Moreover, that hand gave him the feeling that it was as if he was swatting a fly to death casually and lazily. It wasn't fast and was just a casual slap. Following which, the second slap landed on the center of the square. Boom. There was no explosion, but the entire square disappeared. A huge pit that was 3 kilometers in diameter and more than 10 meters deep appeared on the ground. Ren Baqin's heart immediately tightened. The artillery regiment was gone. He didn't know how many of them survived. Even though Tong Lan and the rest were hiding far away, they were underground and he didn't know if anything had happened. This made Ren Baqin subconsciously look to the other side, trying to find some clues from the ground. If the place where they were hiding collapsed, the ground would definitely change. Fortunately, there didn't seem to be much change, which made Ren Baqin feel relieved. The giant hand raised again and was about to slap down again when it suddenly paused. There was an exclamation in the air. Then it increased its speed by 10 times and slammed into the Jiaotou stream. Ren Baqin's face changed. The other party slapped in the direction where the Empress was. The other party remembered the Empress and discovered her. A loud roar and the raised dust obscured his vision. Ren Baqin vaguely saw a landslide. One side of the Jiaotou stream was directly smashed by this slap. Ren Baqin's face immediately turned pale. Could the Empress withstand this slap? Umph. A cold snort came from the sky. It sounded like the owner of this hand wasn't very satisfied. However, the hand shrunk until it was dozens of meters in radius and retracted. The hole in the air also disappeared. Go back. Ren Baqin hurriedly shouted. The one who grabbed him was Shi Wanya. Without waiting for Ren Baqin's instructions, he hurriedly ran back. Chapter 12:20 was a mess. Broken pieces of rubble were scattered everywhere, and they were pressed together by a huge force. There were 10,000 people on the city wall and in the plaza, but less than 1,000 survived. The entire artillery regiment was annihilated. This was the result of the 2 lazy pats of the giant hand. If he had used his full strength from the beginning, even Ren Baqin might not have been able to escape. Jingxingtian, are you alive? Those who are still alive, get into formation. Shi Wanya shouted as he ran. Send someone to the cellar and bring out the 2 boxes. Rinpochen gritted his teeth and stared ahead. The city wall was in a sea of fire, and the dust from the collapsed mountain covered the sky. He couldn't see the Empress at all. This made him a little flustered. Although the strength of that monster is terrifying, Her Majesty is not to be trifled with. Her Majesty will definitely be fine. Shi Wanya quickly instructed someone to fetch the box before he turned around and spoke. Rinpochen didn't care about what he said and just stared ahead. A figure suddenly rushed out of the sky full of dust and crossed the sea of fire. Everyone's heart tightened as they looked carefully. It wasn't Her Majesty, an aboriginal, or a human. It was an earth spirit who looked miserable and had wounds all over his body. Kill him. Just as Shi Wanya's voice left his mouth, a shadowy figure darted out from behind. They were all earth spirits. In a short period of time, more than 100 earth spirits rushed over, and half of them were riding mounts. The strongest were at the cardinal heaven level, and the weakest were at the kismet heaven level. When enemies meet, their eyes turn red. Both sides' eyes turn red. Kill? Shi Wanya shot out like a cannonball and brandished his saber, creating several saber lights that were several meters long. However, before he could slash down, several figures suddenly appeared behind the earth spirits and set off a rain of blood. More than 100 earth spirits were killed in the blink of an eye, leaving only 3 aboriginal men and women. They were the aboriginal experts who were brought out of the wall of the 2 worlds by the Empress. At this moment, 2 long howls and 1 short howl were heard from the sky full of dust. Following these 3 howls, a figure came out of the sea of fire again. Rinpochen heaved a sigh of relief when he saw the familiar figure in red. Although he was in a sorry state, he didn't lose an arm or a leg, so he didn't seem to have any major problems. Your Majesty. Shi Wanya and a few experts were the first to greet him. Your Majesty. The second voice came from the remaining 10,000 elites. For a moment, Rinpochen couldn't hear anything. Everyone was the same as Rinpochen. When they saw the Empress, they felt more assured and at ease. Dayo could lose everyone else, but nothing could happen to the Empress. It's good that you're all right, it's good that you're all right, Rinpochen muttered to himself. Just now he was really frightened. It was as if he had fallen into an ice house. They've retreated. The Empress turned her head and looked at the dust that had yet to dissipate. She didn't look too good. Retreated? Shi Wanya was puzzled. Why would they retreat now that the city walls were gone? Instead of saying that the Black Sky God is the god of the Earth Spirit tribe, it would be better to say that the Earth Spirit tribe is his pet. The Water Empress sneered. That palm strike killed at least half of the Earth Spirits. This result was out of everyone's expectations. No one had expected that half of the Earth Spirit clan's remaining army would be slapped to death by their own god. It sounded like a joke. Everyone felt a little sad for the Earth Spirit tribe. Rinpochen walked to the Empress's side and carefully examined her. After confirming that she wasn't too badly injured, he turned his gaze to the front and wondered, what exactly is this Black Sky God? I have seen this Black Sky God once before, but it wasn't as strong as it is now. Its palm was only a few dozen meters in size. I guess that the leader of the Earth Spirit tribe must have paid a huge price to be able to make the Black Sky God display such strength and no longer have the strength to fight. The Empress frowned. In any case, this Black Sky God was indeed very strong. She didn't know where its main body was, but it could actually attack here. Furthermore, it was so terrifying just by extending its hand. Fortunately, there should be a limit. Otherwise, it wouldn't have retracted after just 3 palm strikes. However, the next time it came, it probably wouldn't be so easy to deal with. After thinking for a while, she put this matter aside and would think of ways to explore the mystery behind it in the future. There were more important things at hand. Just as the Empress said, the remnants of the Earth Spirit tribe retreated, and figures appeared in the sea of fire. The city wall was now level with the ground and had been completely flattened. Li Fu, Li Yuanzhu, Lin Yu, Tengu, and the others all survived. The most dangerous thing was the Black Sky God's palm strike, but its target was the Empress. Although the others were affected and injured, they still survived. As soon as they came back, they sat down and took their medicine. Li Yuanzhu reached out and pinched her left arm and ribs twice to adjust the bones. She couldn't calm down. The palm didn't hit her at all. Just the aftershock knocked her against the mountain wall, breaking her left arm and several ribs. If she had faced that palm head-on, she would have died without a doubt. The aboriginal experts also appeared beside the Empress one by one, and half of them were in a sorry state. The Empress looked around and didn't look good. Other than a few great Xia experts who opened up the heaven and earth domain, the rest were aboriginal experts. However, she realized that 3 people were missing. Needless to say, they must have died under the Black Sky God's palm strike. Unless the Earth Spirit tribe used numbers, it would be difficult for them to keep the aboriginal experts of the same level here. After waiting for half a day for the dust to settle, Rinpoche followed everyone out of Vast Wall City. Even the ground where the Empress fought with many experts had been reduced by 3 meters, and this was just the edge of the palm strike. One could imagine what would have happened if the Empress hadn't avoided it. At present, no one in the human race could withstand this palm strike. More than half of the mountain wall on one side of Jiato Stream had collapsed, and boulders were still falling from time to time. As for the corpses that were swept by the palm strike, they were all under the pile of rocks. In the distance, there were densely packed corpses under the mountain wall, all of which were affected by the palm strike. Even Li Yuanzhu had many broken bones, let alone the ordinary Earth Spirit tribe members. There's no need to dig here. You guys keep watch here, the Empress said to some aboriginal experts who were in better condition. The Black Sky God's palm strike buried more than a dozen Earth Spirit tribe experts here. Given their vitality, they definitely won't die. However, 2/3 of the mountain wall is on top and they can't get out. You guys just wait here for them to dig out and capture as many as they come out. I have to thank the Black Sky God for this. Rinpoche felt a little strange. The city wall was destroyed by the Black Sky God, but if he hadn't killed half of the Earth Spirit tribe soldiers and buried more than a dozen experts here, this battle would still have been fought. If the Earth Spirit tribe had rushed into Guangbai City, it was hard to say how many of the more than 10,000 elites in the city would have survived. This battle is finally over, the Empress said tiredly. Rinpoche heaved a sigh of relief. The casualties were greater than expected, but the current situation wasn't too bad. He had previously prepared for the worst, which was to set up oil barrels everywhere in the city. At worst, Guangbai City would become the graveyard of the Earth Spirit tribe soldiers. In addition to the mountain pass in the middle of Jiato Stream, more than 10,000 people had died in this battle. If everything went smoothly, they could buy a few more years. By the way, where's Suyu? Is he still alive? Rinpoche suddenly remembered that this guy was very useful, but he didn't know if he was lucky enough. Rinpoche couldn't find Suyu after looking around and sighed. What a pity. However, at that time they really couldn't care less about him. So many elites and generals from the Protectorate of the South didn't survive, let alone him. However, when he returned to Guangbai City, he saw a fatty squatting in a corner, shivering. His face was as white as a sheet. Looking at him, other than some abrasions, he was actually fine. This made Rinpoche raise his eyebrows. This fatty's life was really tough. Chapter 12:21. He was not in a hurry to dig out the Earth Spirit clan's experts buried at the bottom of the mountain. He would wait for them to dig themselves out. When they were exhausted, he could capture them and bring them back as samples. One could never have too many samples. The celebration banquet would be held 10 days later, and the Earth Spirit clan would need at least a few months to leave the 100,000 mountain range. Moreover, they had changed their route so they might spend more time. That was because there was nothing to eat on the way here. Everything that could be eaten had been eaten by them. Even with the ferocious beasts that had just moved over, it would be difficult for them to sustain the remaining 4,000 Earth Spirits. The people who had been monitoring the Earth Spirits had to continue watching them. However, everyone was much more relaxed now. Back then, the Earth Spirit race's army of tens of thousands had brought a similar number of ferocious beasts. Even the weakest among them had the strength of a blessed heaven, and there were close to 100 longevity heaven experts. If it had been the human race in the past, this group of Earth Spirits would have been able to kill all of them. It took a few days to clean up and repair Guangbai City. Since it was already built, there was no need to not make use of it. Only after everyone had recovered from their injuries did they start the celebratory feast. The casualties of the human race were not small. In the end, Black Sky God's 3 slaps killed 10,000 people. However, by paying such a price, he managed to gain a few more years. According to previous calculations, the longest would be 6 years, and the shortest would be 3 years. If the Black Sky God directly sent down some kind of divine decree, the Earth Spirit clan's army would attack in another 3 years. Furthermore, his strength was several times stronger than it was now. At that time, it was very likely that the Black God would strike again. No matter how much confidence he had in the Empress, Rinpoche didn't think that the Empress would have the strength to contend against the Black God after 3 years. However, Rinpoche wasn't too worried about this. At most, he would just bombard the invading enemy with a rain of nuclear bombs. So what if the Black Sky God descended again? From the previous time, it could be seen that if he wanted to make a move, there were many restrictions. The war between the races wasn't something that could be decided by an expert who was restricted in various ways. After the celebratory feast, Hua, who had just arrived at Anchuan City's largest protectorate, stuck out his tongue at the Empress and said, "I won't be a third wheel and disturb the two of you. Other people only live apart for a few months, but you two have been apart for more than 10 years. Get lost." Rinpoche waved his hand in disdain. "Am I your biological child? Oh, it's a gift from topping up the game? Since you're my father, I won't complain to the queen about you staying at the brothel every night." Honeysuckle made a face and skipped out of the room. "Rinpoche, everyone else has a cotton-padded jacket, but my cotton-padded jacket is full of knives." The Empress looked at Rinpoche and revealed a spurious smile. She didn't really care about Hua's nonsense. Even though Rinpoche often went to brothels, he still behaved himself and never stayed overnight. But that did not prevent her from frightening him a little. Since they were husband and wife, they had to have a little fun with the whip and candles. Fortunately, Rinpoche wasn't easily intimidated. After so many years, an honest person had also become a troublemaker. He got up, walked behind the Empress, hugged her, and rested his chin on her shoulder. It had been a long time since the two of them were together like this. Relax and be at ease. Moreover, it smelled so good. Rinpoche felt a little restless, but he didn't dare to move. The Empress was already at the pinnacle of the longevity heaven level, while he himself was still at the earth wheel level. He was just one step away from reaching the path to heaven. If he moved, he was afraid that only one of them would survive tonight. That person definitely wouldn't be him. What exactly is that black god? Rinpoche had been pondering this question for a long time. He had also interrogated those Earth Spirit race experts for a long time and obtained some information. The black god had never shown its face. It lived in the so-called God realm. This was similar to any religion. It was too lowly for a god to live with a human. However, the black god could attack from an unknown distance. At that time, it even broke a hole in the sky. This made Rinpoche somewhat believe it. To be able to do this, it wasn't impossible that the black god didn't live in this world. "It definitely isn't a god," the Empress said. "Of course not." Rinpoche's mouth twitched. Even though it wasn't a god, the black god's strength couldn't be underestimated and could be considered terrifying. Rinpoche was just curious about what exactly this black god was. "I wonder how the black god compares to the 6 sky lords," Rinpoche muttered. The Empress was silent for a moment before saying, "In another 3 years, I will definitely be able to take that step. Maybe I can pry a thing or two." "Okay," Rinpoche replied softly. The gap was still too big and he couldn't even touch the edge or make a guess. Late at night, the two of them talked in bed for half the night. They didn't share their feelings as they weren't like that. After a moment of intimacy, they talked a lot about the situation in Dayo over the past few years and how it would develop in the next few years. After the battle, the others could relax a little, but the two of them couldn't relax for even a moment. 3 days later, they dug out all the Earth Spirit race experts buried at the bottom of the mountain and returned to Dayo. The Earth Spirit race hadn't left the 60,000 mountains yet, and they weren't in a hurry to rush to the wall between the two worlds. Moreover, many people wanted to go back and take a look. On the plain, Shurgan, Tonglan, and the others looked at Rinpoche and wanted to say something. "Say it, what's the matter?" Rinpoche was in a good mood. "Your Highness, can we still graduate in this lifetime?" Shurgan and the others couldn't help but ask. Although they didn't personally participate in this battle, they watched it from a very close distance, which had a great impact on them. They really wanted to do something and couldn't hold back some of their thoughts. "Do you think the Academy will support you for a lifetime? When I feel that you can handle things independently, I will naturally let you preside over some research." Rinpoche laughed. "Come on, the value we have created for the Academy is already enough to support us for a lifetime. Tell me, when will you be magnanimous?" Tonglan pouted. In the past, she worshipped the Empress and learned everything she said and did from her. Now, she still worshipped the Empress, but her expression and demeanor when she spoke were similar to Rinpoche's. However, she was much prettier. Rinpoche thought about it and felt that these people were almost there, and they could handle things independently. "Almost there, I just need to take the postdoctoral exam." As soon as he said this, everyone's face turned green. "Listen, is this what a human should say? Can't you be more human? Believe it or not, I'll jump down and die for you." Su Peng looked sad and indignant. Everyone looked at Ren Baqin as if they were looking at an irreconcilable enemy. Alright, I was just saying. Go back and divide yourselves into small groups, set a target and let me review it. If you pass the review, each group will be in charge of one project. If you succeed, I will issue you a graduation certificate. After that, you can stay or leave as you wish. If you don't want to do postdoctoral studies in the academy, you can enter the research institute. Ren Baqin waved his hand. You can't go back on your words. All of you are already quite grown up, yet you are still so childish. Ren Baqin sneered. He sighed in his heart. It could be said that he had watched these children grow up. From counting with their fingers and toes, they were now doctoral students. All of them had participated in many projects and could be considered talents even on Earth. Now the oldest among them was already in his early 30s. Now that the children had grown up, their wings had hardened and it was time for them to fly. Chapter 12:22. The plane arrived at the capital in the middle of the night. The Empress looked out the window at the city outlined by countless lights and didn't look away for a long time. It's so beautiful. The Empress said after the plane changed directions and couldn't see the most prosperous area. This was the second time she had been back in more than 10 years. Every time she saw the prosperous imperial capital, she would feel a burst of satisfaction. This was her country. She saw many officials waiting for her when she got off the plane. Congratulations on your triumphant return, Your Majesty. Congratulations on your triumphant return, Your Majesty. The Empress nodded slightly and looked at everyone. Then she fixed her gaze on the great elder, who was standing with his back straight, and smiled. Not bad. Thanks to Your Majesty and Her Highness, I didn't expect this day to come. The great elder smiled happily. It's your blessing, great elder. This is a joyous occasion, the Empress said with satisfaction. The moment she got off the plane, she realized that the great elder had broken through. The great elder had been seriously injured when he was young, and his body was damaged. In addition, his talent was average, and he and the junior elder had always been the weakest in the imperial court. Now they were both 100 years old, and the limit of a Kismet Heaven expert was 120 to 140 years old. Based on their physical condition, it was hard to say if they could reach 120 years old. Now that the great elder had broken through to the cardinal heaven level, he looked much younger and he could reach 180 to 200 years old. The junior elder was only one step away from the cardinal heaven level, and he had the opportunity to take that step before his death. Apart from the two of them, the others had also improved. If they stayed outside the wall of the two worlds for a few years, they might have the opportunity to break through to the longevity heaven level. That night they rested. The next morning, the Empress and Ren Baqin sat side by side at the head of the court. Ren Baqin handled the court affairs, and the Empress only asked a few questions occasionally. After handling the court affairs, everyone was most concerned about the matter, which was the projection of the battlefield. Since the first battle at Jiato Stream, everyone had been silent, and the atmosphere in the imperial court was solemn. In the first battle at Jiato Stream, the Earth Spirit had completely crushed the Earth Spirit. The difference in strength between the two sides made everyone feel depressed. Everyone in the imperial court was a top expert, but after seeing the Empress dealing with the foreign races, they knew what was going on. With their current strength, it was difficult for them to even participate in such a battle. He was indignant. If they followed the Empress to the outside of the wall of the two worlds, many of them would be able to break through to longevity heaven. It wasn't until the Battle of Guangbai City that everyone's expressions relaxed. The continuous cannon fire and the 100-meter-tall wall of fire proved that everything they had done was not in vain. Until the gigantic palm descended from the sky. This is the Black Sky God? Is this really a god? Even though they already knew about the Black Sky God's existence, everyone in the imperial court was still shocked. He could overturn mountains and seas with just his hands. He was not much different from a god. It doesn't matter what this is. All you need to know is that this thing can be killed. Ren Baqin knocked on the long table in front of him. Although they said that, everyone's expressions were still ugly, and their hearts were heavy. He could kill it, but how? Ren Baqin's heart was also heavy. This thing was probably even more difficult to deal with than the Sixth Heaven Master. Even if the universe battleship couldn't kill the Sixth Heaven Lord, the Sixth Heaven Lord might not be able to do anything to it. Since this thing could break through space, it was even more troublesome. However, he couldn't say it out loud. How many years can we buy? The great elder asked. 3 to 7 years, maybe even longer, but we don't have to worry about the next battle, Rinpoche replied. The Earth Spirit shouldn't cause any trouble in the next battle, but after that they would probably have to face Stainless City and Heaven Master Stainless. After calming everyone down, the junior elder pondered for a moment and asked, should we mobilize the entire nation? Deo has a population of 100 million. If we mobilize the entire nation, we will definitely be able to improve our overall strength in the next few years, and many things will be easier to plan. Not for the time being. What limits us is the speed of technological advancement, not productivity. Rinpoche shook his head. Then, should we let the people know about the existence of the foreign races? Start spreading the news. I will arrange this. Rinpoche was prepared to gradually use the newspapers to reveal the existence of the foreign races. After arranging some matters, there was a banquet in the afternoon. No matter what, it was still a victory. After another morning court session, Rinpoche and the Empress went to the laboratory. There were currently 4 laboratories in the capital, and the 2 of them were going to study the foreign races. The unlimited life of the Earth Spirit was very suitable for scientific research. There's another batch of experimental subjects. How's the progress? Rinpoche and the Empress walked past a few laboratories and casually asked the laboratory supervisor. We have some conjectures, but we need time to verify them. The main problem is that we don't have the symbiotic life of the Earth Spirit. According to some of the confessions we have received, they share their life with a special kind of worm embryo. This kind of worm embryo has no other functions, but its strong vitality and rapid healing ability. Like earthworms? Yes, many species have this ability, but very few species have such a strong vitality. This kind of worm embryo can be shared with them after they reach the immortality realm. After that, they leave the worm embryo in the birth valley because it doesn't have any power. As long as the birth valley isn't breached, they won't die easily. Rinpoche nodded. This was easy to understand. Not only do they share their life with the worm embryo, but they can also share their life with other creatures with strong vitality. It's said that the success rate is very low. They need to sign a contract with another creature. According to the information we have, this is likely a kind of synchronization behavior, which synchronizes the magnetic field or frequency of 2 life forms. If it fails, its body will collapse. The worm embryo has almost no thoughts and won't resist, so the success rate of this synchronization process is very high. Is the effect of the truth elixir good? Rinpoche asked. It sounded like there had been rapid progress recently, and there should be a breakthrough in the truth elixir. Yes, we added a phenothiazine drug and a pseudophysalis plant called Chingsu to the thiopental sodium. After using the aphrodisiac on them, they can forcefully suppress their brain's central nervous system, causing the Earth Spirit to enter a hallucinatory state. However, it's still very difficult to find information about the Black Sky God. Every time we ask about the Black Sky God or related information, they will enter a state of confusion, and their brains have even exploded a few times. It doesn't matter. Anyway, it's very difficult for them to die. I just want to know what I want as soon as possible, Rinpoche said. However, we found something very strange. Even if their body turns into minced meat, they can still recover. So during this process, how are their thoughts and memories preserved? Is it through cells or something else? Did you find anything? Yes, we found that in the process of their death and resurrection, there is an extremely strong existence of electromagnetic waves with a frequency of around 280 Hz. Rinpoche stopped in his tracks, turned his head, and looked incredulous. This is radio frequency waves? Yes, the feeling it gives us is like uploading and downloading data. Chapter 12:23. The person in charge of the laboratory also had an incredulous look on his face as he spoke. At the moment of their death, this electromagnetic wave will appear, and it's very strong. After that, we try to extend the time it takes for them to recover, leaving a blank period in between to confirm this. When they come back to life, the same electromagnetic wave will appear. The former is the outgoing data, while the latter is the incoming data. During this process, their bodies will only have biological instincts. Rinpoche took a long time before exhaling and saying, "This is really an amazing discovery. Are there any more discoveries? For example, where are these electromagnetic waves emitted? How far are they from? How do we block them, and can we analyze the information from them?" These electromagnetic waves will disappear after being transmitted more than 3 meters away, as if there is an invisible door in the air and the electromagnetic waves have entered it. When Rinpoche heard this, he subconsciously thought of the Black God. This was the same method that the Black God used to suddenly appear out of thin air. At the thought of this, Rinpoche's face turned ugly. He didn't know if the Black God would use this method to locate this place. The Black God was too mysterious and no one knew what kind of abilities it had. Make arrangements to separate the Earth Spirit's research and transfer it to another laboratory. I will give you 3 days. Understood. Although the person in charge didn't know the details, he still agreed. Rinpoche and the Empress walked around and understood the situation of this laboratory. After leaving, they immediately arranged for a new laboratory. They would use the original Mount Genesis laboratory. This laboratory was in the capital, and it would be too dangerous if the Black God found it. Even if the possibility was very small, Rinpoche didn't want to take this risk. The Empress asked. She didn't understand technology and didn't know what electromagnetic waves and rays meant. Seeing that Rinpoche was so anxious, she had some guesses. It's radio waves, the same as the radio station we use. However, unlike the radio station, I suspect that it uses electromagnetic waves to transmit and receive data. At the moment of their death, their memories and thoughts are transmitted to an unknown place. When their body recovers, they receive their memories and thoughts. You mean the Black God? Don't memories follow the soul? The Empress understood half of it. Rinpoche shook his head slightly and said, there hasn't been much progress in the study of the soul. Besides, they aren't humans and the appearance of those electromagnetic waves is very strange. Be careful just in case. Bring the Earth Spirit race to Earth and kill one of them to find out, the Water Empress said after thinking for a while. Rinpoche was stunned for a moment before a smile appeared on his face. Good idea. Even though the Empress didn't know much about technology, this idea of hers was indeed brilliant. I'll go back today and arrange for a laboratory to be prepared. Also, you should go back to take a look. My parents thought we were divorced. The Empress snorted, glanced at him and said, if that day really comes, I will bury your head in the 60,000 mountains. In her eyes there was no divorce, only life and death. After all, it has been 40 years. Rinpoche sighed. More than 10 years had passed since the Empress left for the 60,000 mountains. Even Hua was about to reach his 16th birthday. 40 years had passed on Earth. He hadn't seen his daughter-in-law for 40 years, so he could imagine what his parents were thinking. If it weren't for the fact that he controlled the winged cavalry and the large number of Earth wheel experts that he had nurtured over the past few decades, perhaps others would have some ideas. Decades had passed and there were already a large number of man-wheel experts on Earth. However, the Earth wheel experts were still the top experts. Earth wheel experts were the limit. Now, whether it was Rinpoche or others, everyone understood that Earth couldn't produce spirit wheel experts because it lacked something. However, there was still the Horn Dragon Galaxy. There's one more thing before we go back. The Empress blinked and smiled meaningfully. What is it? Go to the brothel that you often go to tonight. It's called Lantern Tower, right? The Empress teased. Rinpoche was confused. Are you out of your mind? I was wrong. Go. Rinpoche decided to bow down to the big boss. For half the afternoon, he and the Empress stayed together in the palace. He didn't try to signal the imperial guards to inform them. It was useless to signal them because they didn't have the brains to do so. The most important thing was that he sat upright. When the city was brightly lit, Rinpoche and the Empress, who had changed into men's clothes, went to Zhangtai Street. They walked to Zhangtai Street. Lantern Tower, is this it? The Empress asked, but she didn't have any intention of asking. As soon as they walked in, someone came to greet them. Oh, it's a distinguished guest. Sir C hasn't been here for a long time. Please come in. The Empress tilted her head and thought for a while. She looked at Rinpoche and asked, Old driver? Rinpoche nodded his head solemnly. The Empress actually guessed it right. The receptionist felt strange. This old guest didn't look like he was here to have fun. Instead, he looked like he was here to be tortured. After entering the main hall, another madam took over and greeted them with an eager face. The Empress had put on makeup previously and didn't know how she managed to make a fake Adam's apple. In addition, she was full of heroic spirit, so the madam didn't notice it. Call that Miss Zhu over. I have been thinking about her for a long time. I want to see her today, the Empress said in a low voice, sounding somewhat neutral. She has been waiting for you for a long time. She will definitely be happy to know that you are here. Just her. Rinpoche coughed lightly. Also, send a table of good wine and dishes. On the second floor, the two entered a room. The Empress turned around and opened the window. She could see the corridor outside and the singing and dancing in the hall below. You really know how to enjoy yourself. Although he said that, he wasn't really angry. Instead, he was quite interested in the singing and dancing below. Considering that she had been in the deep mountains and forests or the vanguard for the past 10 years, it was already very bitter. Not long after, a girl of 17 or 18 years of age with delicate features walked in gracefully and bowed to the two of them. Greetings, Mr. C. Greetings, young master. Zhu pays her respects. The maid outside the door entered the room, put the zither on the zither stand and then withdrew, leaving Zhu inside. Zhu has just learned a new song. Would Mr. C and young master please comment on it? Not long after, the sound of a zither rang out in the room. The empress sized Rinpochen up from head to toe the moment she entered the house. She saw that Rinpochen was natural and unrestrained, not the kind of flirtatious behavior that she had previously imagined. Most importantly, even though she spoke to Rinpochen enthusiastically and happily, she still maintained a certain distance from him. With a single glance, it was clear that the two of them did not have much of a relationship. Otherwise, they would not have such an attitude. As far as she knew, Rinpochen had been here for the past 2 years to look for Miss Zhu. She didn't receive any guests either. Now that he had seen it with his own eyes, the unhappiness in his heart had dissipated. This fellow was rather honest. It didn't matter if he was just here to listen to the music. Otherwise he would be spilled with blood. The empress felt relieved. As the sound of the zither entered her ears, she felt that this lady's zither playing was indeed not bad. There was no smoke and fire, and listening to it made one feel at ease. It was no wonder that this fellow had been coming here for the past 2 years. He even treated this place as his exclusive property. Outsiders had only heard of Miss Zhu in the Lantern House. It was difficult to even meet her. After 2 songs, the empress waved her hand, and Rinpochen allowed her to leave. That lady smiled sweetly and did not say a word. Her playing is not bad. Let's invite her to the palace tomorrow. After Rinpochen left, the empress played with her wine glass with a faint smile on her face. Forget it. Rinpochen waved his hand. Afraid that I'll be stingy? There are so many musicians in the palace. It doesn't matter if she's one more. The empress sneered. If something really happened between the two of them, they naturally couldn't be kept. Since there was nothing going on, the empress would not be a villain. It was rare for her to be generous, but this fellow was actually so suspicious? You don't understand. The atmosphere is different. Rinpochen laughed. The empress's face immediately turned black. Home flowers don't have the fragrance of wildflowers, right? Listening to music in the palace is not as good as listening to music in the brothel, right? Which flower is more fragrant than your majesty? However, the latter sentence is true. Rinpochen chuckled. It was just like how many people like to go to internet cafes to play games. Listening to music in the palace was indeed not as good as listening to music in the brothel. The empress gritted her teeth. In the end, she couldn't control her feet. Set a small goal first. For example, remember in 1 second, booksellers. Chapter 12:24. Erhua ran out as soon as she came back. Compared to the empress, she had a stronger sense of identity with Earth. This was her second home. In particular, the delicacies, technology, and various luxuries on Earth were her favorites. The empress stood in front of the window and looked at the unfamiliar city through the glass. She saw a colorful river of cars in the sky. The current Wuxia city was completely different from before. Buildings that were hundreds of meters tall could be seen everywhere in the distance. Starting from the city center, the buildings became taller as they moved outward. Projection advertisements appeared in the gaps between the tall buildings and above the river of cars. How do you feel? Have you ever woken up and realized that you have become a primitive person? Rinpochen smiled as he sat on the sofa and pressed a button on the coffee table. Messages popped up in the air. The empress looked away from the distance and turned around. It's a mess. She didn't like the world outside the window. The world is developing and it won't stay the same. Rinpochen shook his head. Now, the country had implemented new traffic laws and opened up some air traffic control. For example, the river of cars in the sky was a road in the sky that was 100 meters above the ground. It was said that they were discussing the opening of the second level of the sky passage. There were many changes on Earth, and the empress could only see the changes on the surface. With the development of society, the ideology of the entire society, as well as other things that could not be seen or touched, were the real changes. Even Rinpochen often felt that he had fallen behind, let alone the empress who hadn't been back for decades. These people are really bold. Rinpoche leaned back on the sofa after reading an email and thought about it. What do you mean by bold? The Empress sensed that there was something wrong with Rinpoche's words and walked over to sit beside him. Rinpoche raised his chin. They are in contact with the eight-armed race. There were a total of 2 planets with life in the Horn Dragon Galaxy. One was the four-leaf grass planet where the Thunder Barbarians lived, and the other was the planet where the eight-armed race lived. Currently, the Thunder Barbarian King was still searching for the Earthlings. The Earth had failed to kill him several times, and both sides were like fire and water with no possibility of reconciliation. Furthermore, the Thunder Barbarians had dug a large number of tunnels under all the cities to prevent nuclear bombs from falling from the sky. Under such circumstances, it was not strange for Earth to come into contact with the octopus race on another planet. The other planet was different from the four-leaf grass planet. The four-leaf grass planet had a continent with only wild beasts and no lightning barbarians. That was why humans had built an outpost base there. However, the other planet was different. There were traces of the Ba-Bai race's activities on all the continents. This time, the Earth had learned a lesson from their dealings with the Thunder Barbarians. The first time they came into contact with the king of the octopus race, they had witnessed the strength of the humans, which laid the foundation for the peaceful and friendly bilateral talks between the two sides. Another important point was that the Ba-Bai race had a higher level of civilization, unlike the Thunder Barbarians. Rinpoche said that they were bold, not because of their contact with the eight-armed race, but because a team of envoys from the eight-armed race was on the way to Earth with the spacecraft. A group of rabbits invited wolves to their house as guests. The Empress's description was very accurate. The difference between them was even greater than that between a rabbit and a wolf. "I'm counting on you to support Earth," Rinpoche replied. One could imagine what the Ba-Bai race would think when they came to Earth and found that it was full of weak Earthlings that could be killed with one slap. There was simply nothing better than having powerful weapons and the ability to fly in space. They were so weak that they weren't even worth mentioning. It was like a 3-year-old child holding a rare treasure in one hand and a water gun in the other. However, if there were experts on Earth who were similar in strength to the Ba-Bai race, even if they were slightly weaker with powerful weapons, it would be a different situation. The two sides were likely to reach a bilateral cooperation, trade, exchange and mutual assistance agreement. It was very likely that they were planning to use the power of the Ba-Bai race to deal with the Thunder Barbarians. Previously, they wanted to use the power of the Empress to deal with the Thunder Barbarians, but were rejected by Rinpoche and even flipped the table. This time, the Empress would definitely support Earth by inviting the Ba-Bai race to her house. Fortunately, the Empress wasn't outside the barrier between the two worlds. Otherwise, it would take her more than half a year on Earth to rush over to support Earth. There's a tiger at home and a pack of wolves outside. Perhaps they are planning to use external forces to deter me. The Empress smiled until her eyes were squinted, and there was a cold glint in her eyes. Then she waved her hand and said, "It doesn't matter." Rinpoche nodded slightly. What the Empress said was inevitable. With such a person at home, it was inevitable that some people would have other thoughts. However, this was a small matter and Rinpoche didn't care about their thoughts. In any case, the two of them were firmly tied to the Earth. The news was sent through Rinwanyan. He reckoned that it was to let him be mentally prepared and that the official documents would be sent over after some time. Nowadays, planes were faster and it was easier to apply for air routes. That night, Rinpoche brought the Empress and Heir Hua to his hometown in the northeast. Decades had passed and this place had changed a lot. However, compared to Wuxia City, it was still vaguely the same as it was in the past. Will Grandpa and Grandma be scared when they see Mother Empress? It's been more than 40 years and you two have been married for even longer. You look just like my sister. It's scary, Honeysuckle mumbled in the car. His eyes kept darting around, making him look like a mischievous spirit. Last time, they even asked me in a roundabout way how long it had been since I last saw Mother Empress. I reckon that they wanted to ask if I had divorced. Then you told them that you haven't seen her in decades? Rinpoche slapped her on the head. Stop slapping, it's going to hurt. Heir Hua covered her head and smiled until her eyes were squinted. He could vaguely see the Empress's eyebrows, but this mischievous look was unlike anyone else. Then they were almost in tears. Even after the divorce, they still had to come back to see their child. The Empress's face darkened, and she slapped Heir Hua on the head as well. You two are a mixed duo. Honeysuckle retreated backward. A slap from a Mother Empress would hurt a lot. Her brain was almost slapped out. In a villa area in the small city, the flying car stopped in front of a small courtyard. After entering the password, the door opened automatically. Grandpa, Grandma. Hua slipped into the house. You're back. A joyful voice came from inside. There was also a muffled "Aunt." As Rinpoche and the Empress entered, the expressions of the people in the house froze. They were indescribably shocked. Dad, Mom. The Empress's voice was squeezed out from the gaps between her teeth, and it carried a gust of cold air. I have already said that she has some matters to attend to. Rinpoche chuckled and hung his clothes at the side. The family quickly became lively again. Rinpoche's parents were in good spirits as they inquired about their well-being. However, the atmosphere was a little strange. It wasn't because of the Empress. Rinpoche and Hua were often like this when they came back. Rin Wanyin was already over 70 years old. Even if he took good care of himself, coupled with martial arts and medicine, he still looked to be around 50 years old. Rin Wanyin was also over 40 years old. Even his son Rin Kai, who called the Empress Aunt just now, was almost 20. Rinpoche looked to be around 30 years old, Hua looked to be 17 or 18, and the Empress, who hadn't been seen for a long time, was still 20. They looked like twin sisters when they sat together. The 70-year-old addressed the 30-year-old as brother, and the 20-year-old as sister-in-law. The 20-year-old addressed the 17-year-old as aunt, the 30-year-old as grandpa, and the 20-year-old as grandma. The Empress's body stiffened when she heard Rinpoche address her as grandma. This table of people sitting together was too messy. Chapter 12:25. Time is like the scouring of water and will inevitably leave traces. The reason why I'm young is that I don't experience the same amount of time as you, not because my lifespan is longer than yours. Just like the Horn Dragon Galaxy, the time here is different from Earth. Give up all this and live in a world without computers or the internet for 100 years, or stay on Earth for 100 years. Perhaps you can consider migrating to the Horn Dragon Galaxy, which is indeed more beneficial for training. Rinpoche sat in a chair with Rin Xia, who was in his 40s, in front of him. At this point, Rin Xia had completely lost his youthfulness. Rinpoche wasn't surprised by Rin Xia's idea. However, the fact was that time was fair to everyone. In fact, Rin Wanyin already knew this, so he didn't mention it. Of course, there were some treasures that could erase the traces of the passage of time, such as the jade embryo used by the Empress. However, with so many aboriginals in the 60,000 mountains, they hadn't found a second one in more than 10 years. As for ordinary life-prolonging drugs, they might not be comparable to the drugs that could delay aging on Earth. Rin Xia heaved a sigh of relief and relaxed after hearing Rinpoche's words. He was under a lot of pressure to ask his uncle about this matter. He didn't doubt Rinpoche's words at all because they were in line with his understanding. Moreover, Rinpoche rarely appeared in front of people and had been like this for the past few decades. It wasn't just him but also Lu Hua. After changing his posture to make himself more comfortable, Rin Xia thoughtfully asked, "Uncle, when do you think there will be a chance to migrate to the Horn Dragon Galaxy?" There were many things on Earth and he knew much more than Rinpoche. However, he had to see what Rinpoche had to say about this matter. Let's see the agreement between those people and the eight-armed race. Migrating to the Horn Dragon Galaxy wouldn't be to the planet where the eight-armed race was located, but to the planet where the Thunder Barbarians were located. The eight-armed race probably wouldn't mind expanding their territory to another planet. Rinpoche and the Empress stayed in this small northeastern city for a few days before returning to Wuji City. The day before they returned to Dayo, Rinpoche received a call from someone. The eight-armed race had just set off from the space station outside the node. It was a huge transit station that could accommodate 5,000 people, tens of thousands of robots, and a huge amount of resources. There were a total of 26 people from the eight-armed race, and 3 of them had an energy value of 30,000. The highest had even reached 45,000. There were still 2 months before they arrived on Earth. After returning to Earth again, he made a special trip to the imperial capital to meet many people, and the talks went smoothly. When it was time to stand up, they should stand up, and when it was time to ask for benefits, they should also ask for benefits. This wasn't the first time that both parties had dealt with each other. Although there had been several batches of people over the years, most of those who had retired were still alive. The newcomers also knew of this special existence and would communicate with him a few times, so they weren't too unfamiliar with him. This time around, both parties had their own needs and were well aware of each other's intentions. Rinpoche wouldn't make any excessive requests, so it could be considered harmonious. Next, he would return to Dayo and wait for the arrival of the Ba Bai clan. Before that, he had something more important to do. In the palace of Dayo, the empress sat in the courtyard with one hand supporting her cheek and the other playing with a wine glass. Following her gaze, she could see Rinpochen sitting cross-legged in the main hall. At this moment, 16 elemental crystals the size of 2 fingers were placed around Rinpochen. Rinpochen closed his eyes and immersed himself in darkness. Dong, dong, dong. Every minute, the earth would jump, and some invisible and intangible things would flow into Rinpochen's body. This was the chi of the earth embryo. With the help of this chi, Rinpochen condensed his essence chi into a ball and used it to collide with the invisible barrier. Although the barrier couldn't be seen, it was extremely hard. After 2 years and countless collisions, Rinpochen only felt a slight loosening. Now the loosening was getting bigger and bigger. Rinpochen accumulated his strength in the darkness. Every time his strength reached its peak, he would use the chi of the earth embryo to collide with the barrier. After an unknown period of time, Rinpochen vaguely felt that there was a slight difference after this collision. He seemed to have heard it crack. It's about to open. Rinpochen was elated. Open. Rinpochen gathered his strength again and shook it. Open. On the 10th time, he felt a crack appear on the barrier. Open. 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 On the 20th time, the crack became bigger and bigger. Open for me. On the 30th time, the barrier was finally broken by him. The crack completely split open, and boundless energy poured into his body from the top of his head. It was as if a skylight had suddenly been opened in a dark and stuffy room without any doors or windows. Light shone through the crack and illuminated Rinpochen's spirit. The boundless energy continued to pour into his spirit. Rinpochen felt that his spirit was getting bigger and bigger, like a fatty full of energy. At the same time, there was a huge change in Rinpochen's sea of knowledge. The quiet and lifeless universe seemed to be blown by a gust of wind. The entire universe suddenly came alive, and some indescribable changes were happening. The empress, who was sitting in the courtyard, felt a gust of wind in the palace. With Rinpochen as the center, all the energy emitted by the crystals was absorbed into his body. More energy swept in from all directions, forming a tornado that soared into the sky. The eye of the tornado was where Rinpochen was. Mother, father has broken through. Duohua came out of nowhere. Wow, that's really worth celebrating. The empress smiled and nodded. She had spent a lot of effort and used a lot of heavenly treasures. Back then, even the treasury of the palace was emptied. Rinpochen had finally reached this step. It wasn't easy. With the energy emitted by the crystals as a supplement, Rinpochen didn't take too long to break through. In just 2 hours, the wind above the palace had dissipated. However, the energy that was constantly emitted was still flowing into Rinpochen's body. After another 2 hours, Rinpochen opened his eyes with a smile on his face. He had finally broken through and skipped the path to heaven. His spirit was connected to the energy of heaven and earth, and he had directly reached the level of the spirit wheel. With a flick of his finger, he felt an immeasurable amount of energy condense at his fingertips. A pillar of fire that was slightly thicker than his finger and several meters long shot out. With a flip of his hand, the pillar of fire was extinguished. He raised his palm, causing the ground to tremble. Then a row of stone needles that were more than 1 meter tall popped out. With another wave of his hand, boundless water fell from the sky. Rinpochen tried using the 5 elements and was finally able to operate them as he wished. It wasn't easy. Congratulations, father. Congratulations. Duohua came in from the main hall with a smile. With a flick of his finger, a fist-sized stone ball appeared out of thin air and smashed toward Duohua's head. Duohua was even faster and disappeared in a flash. Yao Yao's clear voice fell from the sky and said, "You want to hit me as soon as you wake up." Rinpochen laughed and moved his feet. The ground shortened under his feet, and he arrived in the courtyard in 1 step. The water empress let out a soft cry of surprise as a look of surprise appeared in her eyes. Now that I have broken through, I understand that I can only be considered to have truly mastered the ancient scroll of methods. Rinpochen smiled. He was extremely happy. The spirit wheel was only the foundation of the ancient scroll of methods, and it was only now that he was able to shine. Chapter 12:26. Rinpochen spent a few days familiarizing himself with the situation after his breakthrough. The biggest change was that the time it took for him to travel between the 2 realms had been greatly reduced. Previously, when he was at the Earth wheel level, he needed at least 2.5 days to travel between the two realms, and the longest time was half a month. After attaining the spirit wheel level, he only needed 1.5 days to transmigrate again, and the longest he could stay was 1 month. Rinpoche guessed that when he reached the realm of opening up the sky and earth, he would need at least half a day to travel through space. Even if he only had 1.5 days, he still had a lot of leeway to do whatever he wanted. His body didn't change much. It was just that when he broke through to the spirit wheel level, his body was cleansed by the vital energy of heaven and earth, and his strength and speed were slightly enhanced. His physical body was incomparable to that of a cardinal heaven ancient race expert. However, compared to other spirit wheel experts, Rinpoche's ability to communicate with vital energy was far superior. Furthermore, he had the ability to evolve the 5 elements using the universe in his sea of knowledge as a foundation. Combined with the chi of heaven and earth, he had some time to prepare and launch a big fireball with all his strength. The power was no less than a bomb containing a ton of TNT. It was difficult to use in actual combat. Although its power was not small, its speed was too slow. He needed at least 10 seconds to prepare, and his speed was about 100 meters per second. Given the reaction and speed of a spirit wheel expert and a cardinal heaven expert, it would be difficult to hit him unless he was entangled with someone. One had to know that spirit wheel and cardinal heaven experts could move at least dozens of meters in a second. If it was just an area of effect, it would at most cause some damage. In any case, Rinpoche now had some ability to protect himself. Moreover, it was a true class change to a magical class. However, the true value of the ancient scroll of methods was not here. Rinpoche sat in the garden and looked at the ancient scroll of methods in his hands. After advancing to the spirit wheel level, Rinpoche was able to read a portion of the ancient scroll of methods, but he didn't expect the contents to be like this. Will concentration technique. When other people reached the spirit wheel level, they had to separate a part of their spirit to link their vital energy and condense it into a heaven-grade weapon. The weapon's power was incomparably great, and it also had all kinds of wonderful uses. Rinpoche already knew about this and had seen a lot of it. For example, Blood Sea Demon's Blood Sea, Ma Hongyu's brush, and Li Yuanzhu's wooden sword. All of them had different functions. But this condensing will spiritual concentration technique was completely different from the others. What it gathered was the power of will. What was condensed was a god. Offering incense, gathering the power of faith, absorbing vitality, and finally forming a god in this world. The power of will and divine sense had some similarities. Ordinary people were unable to excavate divine sense, but by gathering the power of will of everyone in the world, they could gather sand to form a tower. This deity was formed from a strand of his spirit. This deity was his heaven-grade weapon and also his clone. In addition, this deity could also absorb willpower and feedback it to improve his cultivation. As for how much it would give back to him, it would depend on how close he was to this deity. People's hearts were complicated, and they prayed for different things. Health, wealth, men, women, love, kinship, hatred, desire. The wishes of the people who prayed to the gods contained everyone's thoughts. Therefore, even though the clone of the god used Rinpoche's divine sense as the core, it also contained countless distracting thoughts. The greater the connection between Rinpoche and the deity's clone, the more power he received, but the more distracting thoughts he received. On the other hand, if he received fewer distracting thoughts, the power of the feedback would be smaller. If he wasn't afraid of being attacked by countless distracting thoughts and had enough power of will, he would be able to break through from the spirit wheel level to the heaven and earth level in a few years. At this point, Rinpoche finally understood why he had to hover between life and death during the cultivation process of Rui visualization. After experiencing countless deaths, his mind became as solid as steel, and he was able to accept more distracting thoughts without going crazy because of the countless distracting thoughts that rushed into his mind. Originally, he thought that it was to strengthen his divine sense so that he could practice the spirit nurturing technique when he was at the earth embryo level, cross the path to heaven, and reach the spirit will level. Now it seemed that he had thought too simply. After reading this will concentration technique, a few times Rinpoche closed the secret manual, closed his eyes and sat there thinking. I don't know who created this technique, but it's really amazing. Compared to the technique of creating a heaven-grade weapon, it's a completely different approach. It condenses the deity and returns it to the body. Moreover, the body and the deity are two bodies, and the power is infinite. The benefits are naturally great, but the risks are also not small. The clone of the deity has its own consciousness and can even affect the body. This technique must be practiced. If I progress fast enough, I will have some combat power in the future when there is a war. However, I have to think about the details. This is to condense the power of wishes and become a deity. The deity is affected by the power of wishes and distracting thoughts. If the believers are peaceful, the clone of the deity will be peaceful. If the believers are cruel, the deity will be cruel. Rinpoche gently tapped his fingers on the armrest of the chair. If he wanted to condense the power of wishes, the best way was to form a religion. However, after thinking about it carefully, it didn't make much sense. Firstly, it was too time-consuming. Secondly, the greatest significance of this religion was to gather believers and become a deity. Starting a religion from scratch would take up a lot of time even if the country promoted it. The best way was to find a religion that had a certain foundation, a lot of followers, and a wide spread. As for the doctrine, if there were any parts that didn't suit him, it could be changed. This might be difficult for others, but it couldn't be any easier for Rinpoche. Currently, there were some religions in Dayo. The first to bear the brunt was Buddhism. There were many believers in Tianjin Basin and even in the Chuyin residence. As for Taoism, there were also many followers in the Chuyin residence. However, there were many Taoist temples, and the deities that the two temples worshipped were different. In order to make use of them, they had to be combined and compiled into a unified Taoist canon. This way, the time and effort required was about the same as creating a new religion. As for the Aboriginals, they worshipped their ancestors. Furthermore, the Aboriginals were violent. With the Aboriginals as the main believers, the clone of the deity would probably be violent and irritable. In addition, there was Lin Dong's righteous sect. In addition, there was also the Ajati matriarch who was developing well among the foreign races. However, there were many foreign races and many of them had a chaotic temperament which could easily affect their temperament. In this case, Buddhism was the most suitable. Buddhism? I've always asked. I wonder if that monk saw anything. Rinpoche frowned. What are you thinking about? The Empress's voice came from beside him. Rinpoche opened his eyes and saw that the Empress had unknowingly sat beside him. There's a technique in the ancient scroll of methods called prayers and concentration technique. Rinpoche briefly explained what he was thinking about just now. Prayers and concentration technique? The Empress finally repeated it softly. After thinking for a moment, she smiled and said, "This technique is quite interesting. A deity actually concentrates the hearts of the people. I wonder how it compares to the deity of the long-haired monster." Rinpoche raised his eyebrows and said, "Maybe that's how the deity of the Earth Spirit tribe came about. The techniques might be different, but there might be similarities." The Empress thought about it carefully and nodded. It's indeed possible. If that's the case, the human race might be able to condense a powerful deity. If it's so easy, the human race might not have been defeated back then. How many people understand what happened back then? The Empress said faintly. Let's not think too much about it. When we meet the envoy from the 8-arm race from the Horned Dragon Galaxy, I'll start on this technique, Rinpoche said as he held the Empress's hand. It's better to be careful. Don't be blinded by it or the loss will outweigh the gain. Don't worry, I know what to do. Since there are still a few days left, I'll make a trip to the East Sea and meet that monk. Set a small goal first, such as 1 second. Chapter 12:27. If there was a Buddhist nation in the East Sea, this would be it. When Rinpoche came here decades ago, every family worshipped Buddha, and the shops on the streets were mostly related to Buddhism. There were countless restaurants that were famous for vegetarian food. It seems to be the same as decades ago. Rinpoche looked down at the East Sea from the sky. It was completely different from Wuxia City, which was full of sci-fi style. Over the past decades, the East Sea had been expanded and renovated, but overall, it didn't seem to have changed much. The flying car landed in the East Sea and headed for the Jingxin Temple. Most people who came here were like this, showing respect from the bottom of their hearts. There were even many people who walked to the temple as if they were on a pilgrimage. The #1 temple in the world wasn't the result of a commercial operation. It looks quite comfortable this way, the Empress said softly. This style was similar to the first time she came to Earth. Is this an ancient city? I've heard from others that the abbot here is very powerful. I wonder if he can beat me. Hua held her cheek with one hand and rolled her eyes. No one knew what she was thinking. How can this be considered an ancient city after a few decades? Don't get any ideas. Rinpoche patted her head. That monk was very strange. He had long wanted to come again, but he always had scruples and couldn't make it in the end. He could feel the strong Buddhist atmosphere in the East Sea, and it was even more so at the foot of the mountain. Even the air was filled with the fragrance of sandalwood. As he followed the crowd up the mountain, he saw people lining up to enter the mountain gate. Many people froze as soon as they stepped through the gate. All kinds of past events flowed into their minds, and all kinds of emotions surged from the bottom of their hearts. Some were crying, some were remorseful, and some were determined. This was the heart-refining sect. The middle gate was for people who came here for the first time, and it had the effect of refining their minds. The two doors on both sides, one for entering and the other for exiting, didn't have the effect of refining their minds. As if it was his first time here, Renbachien, the Empress, and Hua lined up to enter the middle gate. Renbachien was in a trance as he passed through the heart-refining sect. His second time here didn't have any effect. When he looked back, he saw Hua standing there with a complicated look on her face. She was gritting her teeth with great sorrow and joy, as if she had opened a dyeing workshop. Renbachien didn't know what this devil incarnate had learned from this sect and was a little curious. Then she burst into tears. When he walked out of the heart-refining gate, his eyes turned red and he said, "I remember the two of you fighting together again. It's like I've been beaten up a few times. You're already an adult, yet you've learned to hold a grudge." Renbachien casually slapped the back of her head. Then he turned his head and looked at the inside of the temple. Compared to the past, the Tranquil Heart Temple was many times bigger. There were countless people in the temple, and it was unknown how many monks were passing through. It was dignified, grand, and caused others to not dare act rashly. Just by standing here, it caused one's mind to feel calm and tranquil without joy or sorrow. "Greetings, benefactors. Please follow me." A middle-aged monk walked to the three of them and placed his palms together. Renbachien immediately understood that the monk knew that he was coming. After crossing a small bridge, Renbachien looked at the huge lotus flowers in the middle of the pond. A fragrance that calmed one's mind was emitted from it. The last time Renbachien came here, he didn't notice it. This time, however, he realized that the lotus wasn't an ordinary item. It was very beneficial to him. In particular, the effect of calming one's mind was very beneficial to his future practice of concentration technique. When they arrived at the main hall, Renbachien first lit a stick of incense, walked into the hall, and bowed to the Buddha statue in the hall. This was what he was supposed to do. He looked up and saw that the Buddha statue had its head lowered as if it was looking at him. He turned around and walked out of the main hall, following the middle-aged monk to the back of the mountain. Along the way there were all kinds of wild beasts such as foxes, black bears, and large snakes. All kinds of wild beasts wandered around the temple and didn't avoid people. They were gentle, deeply influenced by Buddhism, and seemed to have become spirits. When they arrived at the back of the mountain, they saw a middle-aged monk in a white robe standing there with a warm smile on his face. He placed his palms together and greeted the three of them. "Greetings, benefactors." "Greetings." Renbachien cupped his hands and was surprised. The last time he met him was when he had just obtained the Empress's martial arts. 60 years had passed on Earth. At that time this monk was around 30 years old. Now he should be around 100 years old, right? He actually looked like he was in his 40s. Taoists cultivated one's nature and life. They cultivated an impenetrable body and had their own way of cultivation. Therefore there were many Taoists who were over 100 years old. Buddhism cultivated one's nature and not life. Their physical body was just a cage and they rarely cultivated it. Renbachien didn't know how this monk did it. Suwen seemed to know what Renbachien was thinking. He chuckled and said, "Buddhism also cultivates a raft to cross the sea of bitterness." Renbachien was deep in thought. "Great monk, are you the master of great monk Xingrua?" Hua asked. "How is Xingrua?" Suwen asked with a smile. "Not very good. He has had enough of being a vegetarian. He formed a band with me to eat and drink," Hua said with a mischievous smile. Suwen chuckled and said, "He can cultivate both in and out of the world. Arhat also has a wife and children." The Empress glanced at him and asked, "What are you trying to say, monk?" Suwen smiled and didn't answer. He stretched out his hand and said, "Benefactors, please follow me." The few of them entered the house and sat down. A moment later someone served a plate of fruits. The fragrance of the fruits was tempting. Hua couldn't help but take a bite. The flesh of the fruit melted into a sweet and fragrant liquid and entered his stomach. Then it turned into a warm current that spread to his limbs. Hua's eyes widened. She knew a lot about Earth. The essence chi here was sparse and there were very few rare treasures. There was almost nothing that caught her eye. She didn't expect that this monk would have such a good thing. Abbot, do you know why I'm here? Rinpoche took a bite of the fruit and asked with a straight face. I know a thing or two. Please go ahead. Everyone in the world is Buddha. Everyone worships Buddha, but they don't know how to worship the Buddha in their hearts, Suwon said and smiled. If Buddha can accept it, so can Arhat. Rinpoche's face darkened. This monk indeed knew. Who are you exactly? Suwon's eyelids drooped and said, I am Buddha. Rinpoche's gaze was as sharp as a knife, but Suwon didn't seem to notice it. Rinpoche thought for a while and his expression suddenly eased up. He smiled and said, If I establish another sect, what will you do? The teachings passed down by the Buddha are cultivated by the mortals and they are Buddhists. Even if it is called the Divine Sect Taoism or the White Lotus Sect, why not? How should the teachings passed down by Arhat be named? What impact will it have? Suwon's words hit the nail on the head. According to him, Rinpoche was Arhat and also a Buddha. No matter what the name of the sect he passed down was or what the content was, the fundamentals wouldn't change. Rinpoche understood this point and pointed at Suwon. He shook his head and said, You have already understood everything. Everything starts from Arhat's heart. Suwon shook his head. But it has nothing to do with me. Father, why are you talking in riddles with the big monk? Erhua rolled his eyes a few times. It's nothing. Rinpoche shook his head gently. He had already understood the monk's words. Abbot, what do you want to teach me? Rinpoche thought for a while and asked. Arhat, you just have to follow your heart. Rinpoche shook his head and acted as if he didn't say anything. Since this was the case, there was nothing more to say. This monk was too weird. He really couldn't imagine how there could be such a person on earth. Rinpoche thought to himself, You have a lot of good stuff here. Whatever you want, Arhat, just take it. Plant it around the temple and receive incense offerings every day. Then it will live. Rinpoche didn't stand on ceremony. He spent half a day walking around the back mountain of the tranquil temple with Suwon. He even packed a few bags of lotus seeds, impermanent rice and various fruits for planting. The next day there was news. Suwon had passed away in meditation. Rinpoche was stunned when he heard the news. It was as if he had been waiting for Rinpoche to come and fight him. Chapter 12:28. Rinpoche wasn't sure whether this strange monk was dead or not. If there were bones, Rinpoche really wanted to dig them out. However, it was said that Suwon had left behind some instructions for his funeral in the main hall when he suddenly dissipated. He was like a statue made of mud. He had suddenly dissipated and disappeared without a trace. Not even a speck of dust was left behind. All that was left were a few pearls, which were said to be relics. They looked similar to glass balls. Some people said that Suwon had become a Buddha, but it didn't seem like it. The news from the Jingshin temple said that he had passed away. Rinpoche couldn't be bothered to find out what was going on with this monk. The envoy from the eight-armed race was about to arrive on Earth. Rinpoche first went back to Dayo and brought some people back. The Empress was an expert who had 1 foot in the longevity heaven realm, but she was the only one, which seemed to be lacking in grandeur. After all, the significance of one expert and a group of experts was completely different. Besides, no one knew what would happen after the eight-armed race arrived, and he couldn't let the Empress show up for everything. As for the candidates, Rinpoche pulled a few aboriginal experts from the longevity heaven over. In any case, these people only had muscles in their heads and killing people. They were 100 times more barbaric than the officials in the imperial court. Even if they came into contact with Earthlings, they wouldn't be able to figure out that they were on another planet. Moreover, even if they knew that they were on another planet, it wouldn't affect them much. Rinpoche selected Xan Cho, Ben Ding, Su Fong and Zhu Puhua from the list. Xan Cho wasn't far from the intermediate level of the longevity heaven. Moreover, all 4 of them had brains filled with muscles and slaughter. They were boorish fellows who would either fight to the death or fight to the death. This included the giant garden flower. There was a slight fluctuation in the air, and 5 figures appeared in the room. They felt their vision blur, and they were transported from the palace to another place, which surprised them. They were considered the strongest of the human race, but they didn't expect that the prince could bring them to another place in the blink of an eye. Your Majesty. They came back to their senses from the unfamiliar decorations and saw the Empress watching a television program on a projector. The Empress's clothes were rather peculiar and completely different from Dayo's. Her hair was also casually scattered behind her head. Even the majesty of her body seemed to have lessened. The few of them felt that it was strange, but they didn't think much of it. Now that we are here, listen to Zhao Prince Consort's arrangements and don't cause any trouble. The Empress looked up and glanced at them. Where is this? The giant garden flower asked curiously. The chaotic star sea, Rinpoche replied casually. In any case, they didn't know where it was. The rules here are different from those in Dayo. You can't hurt people at will. If you get into trouble, you will be exiled here forever, Rinpoche said. Their expressions changed a few times. Compared to the outside of the Wall of Two Realms, there was almost no vitality here. In addition to the strange smell that they could faintly smell, being exiled here was probably worse than being imprisoned. Rinpoche pressed a button on the wall and gave a few instructions. Very soon, the winged cavalry warriors brought the four of them away. Next, the four of them indulged in the erguoto. Unfortunately, even though the meat was improved from the meat he brought back, it was still far inferior to the ferocious beasts in the 60,000 mountains, let alone the ones outside the Wall of Two Worlds. Not to mention the fact that there was almost no energy in the meat. Fortunately, there were many ways to cook it, and with the addition of various seasonings, it was a refreshing experience for them. After eating nearly 5,000 kilograms of meat and a ton of erguoto for a whole day, they didn't have the opportunity to cause any trouble. The next day, Rinpoche and the Empress brought everyone onto 3 medium-sized flying cars. Half a day later, everyone landed on an island chain in the Pacific Ocean. 8 small and medium-sized islands surrounded and protected a medium-sized island like stars surrounding the moon. This joint base, which nominally belonged to the entire world, was actually jointly guarded by a few major United Nations organizations and a few powerful countries. Mr. Ren Mishchi. Rinpoche saw an old man and a few generals when he landed from the sky. Oldly, I didn't expect you to come. Thank you for your trouble. Rinpoche looked friendly and shook hands with the other party. This old man was also an old man who often appeared in the News Federation. However, Rinpoche had dealt with him decades ago. Oldly has become oldly. I have to admit that I'm old. I'm envious to see Mr. Ren and Miss Chi, the old man said with a gentle smile and a tinge of envy in his eyes. When he first met Rinpoche, they were about the same age. Now, he had the power that countless people envied, but time was like a knife that made people grow old. However, time seemed to have stopped for the other party. How could he not be envious? Those with power were most afraid of time. Which emperor, king, general, and minister didn't want to live forever? Both parties went to the base to talk for a while before Rinpoche went back to rest. That empress has an energy response of 63,000. As for these 4 people, this man has an energy response of 19,000, and the other 3 have an energy response of 15,000 to 17,000. Mr. Rin has an energy response of 2,800. In another room, Old Li listened to his subordinate and was a little absent-minded. 63,000? When she caused trouble in the United States last time, her energy response was only 20,000. Furthermore, those 4 people are much stronger than those people from the previous time. Those people from the previous time had an energy response of about 4,000. They can be said to be human-shaped nuclear bombs, and they are much more threatening than nuclear bombs. Nuclear bombs are dead, but humans are alive. Such people can be said to be gods, and humans are completely unable to resist them. Our most powerful Earth-class expert doesn't have an energy value of more than 1,500, another old man in military uniform said. It should be the so-called hierarchy. Rinpoche has obviously surpassed the Earth class and is already at the Heaven class. As for the Empress and the others, they should be at a higher level or even 2. Don't consider their threat. As long as no one provokes them, they won't do anything. After so many years, we should rest assured, Old Li said softly. If possible, no one wanted to have such a person in the world who could take their life with a wave of his hand. It was like a ferocious tiger sneaking into a rabbit's nest. However, the example of the United States was still in front of them. They really couldn't be provoked. Moreover, in front of those foreign races, they are the protectors of us humans. The stronger they are, the better. Old Li leaned back in his chair with a calm expression. Without them, how would we dare to meet those foreign races so easily? The Thunder Barbarians on the four-leaf grass planet have already explained that ferocious tigers will only fight with ferocious tigers. As soon as he said this, everyone nodded one after another. No matter what thoughts they had, they kept them at the bottom of their hearts. At noon the next day, Rinpoche received the news after lunch. He and the Empress brought Xan Cho and the others to meet up with Old Li and some other generals. They took a flying car to a building on another island. The huge platform outside was where the spacecraft would land. There were also high-level officials from the Rising Sun City, the United States and other countries here. When they saw Rinpoche and the Empress, they greeted them with kindness and fear in their eyes. After waiting for half an hour, they saw a black dot in the sky getting bigger and bigger. A medium-sized spacecraft that was 1,000 meters long spewed out 16 blue flames and slowed down as it descended. As the ground shook slightly, everyone became alert. This was the first time that Earth had welcomed extraterrestrial guests. Chapter 1229. This is Earth? The home of those humans? In space, a lady dressed in a luxurious robe looked at the screen in front of her. On it was the image of the outside world of the spaceship. It was a blue planet. The lady had short hair and was not particularly beautiful. However, she had a dignified aura that would strike fear into the hearts of anyone who saw her. 6 arms extended from the back of the robe. However, what caught people's attention the most was that each of her arms was emitting a faint golden glow as if they were made of metal. They were completely different from the other members of the 8-armed race. 3rd shaman were finally here. Another lady from the 8-armed race let out a long sigh. It was a novelty when they first boarded the spaceship. However, after a few months, the novelty faded and only boredom was left. I don't even dare to train here. I'm afraid that I'll crush those weak humans in the equally weak spaceship. Although those humans are weak, their things are quite interesting. We can move those interesting things back to the mother planet. They won't have any objections anyway. Of course, once we arrive at that place called Earth, even if they have any objections, it will depend on our mood. The 200 square meter room was furnished with a sofa, a soft bed and a bar counter. Such a large room on the spaceship was considered extravagant. 6 ladies from the 8-armed race were either standing or sitting in the room. They were of different ages. The only thing they had in common was that they all had 8 arms. Other than the 3rd shaman, 2 of them had arms that emitted different shades of metallic luster. From their positions and expressions, it was clear that the 3rd shaman of the 8-arm race had the highest status. The 3rd shaman gestured for everyone to stop. According to those humans, there are powerhouses among them too. Those humans are so weak. The strongest among them is only a member of the 4-armed race. Those so-called powerhouses are only the strongest among the humans, one of the 8-armed race ladies said casually. The 3rd shaman did not refute. She had a similar opinion. No matter what, the most important thing this time is to understand the situation of the humans and get them to teach us how to build spaceships that can travel in the astral world. Apart from that, their technology is also very useful to our race, the 3rd shaman said slowly. In the 8-armed race's knowledge system, the astral world was beyond the mother planet. In the language of the humans, it was called outer space. Therefore, we are not allowed to act recklessly. It's best that humans are weak. We can make more things. The 3rd priest warned. Then his tone changed. Of course, we have to let them understand the gap between us and them. Lord Priestess, please don't worry, the others said one after another. The 3rd shaman's lips curled into a smile. This was the plan that they had decided on before they came. To them, humans were as fragile as children. Even if they possessed powerful weapons and some useful technology, in the face of true power, everything had to bow down to it. Originally, it was the astral world that prevented them from exerting their power. However, when they came to Earth, it was like a baby with a huge fortune who opened the door to protect himself. At this moment, in the command hall, there was a wavy pattern in the air in one of the corners. When one got closer, one could hear voices. It was the voices of the 8-arm race members conversing in the hall. Have you analyzed it? What are they talking about? The commander in the general uniform asked in a deep voice. No. This language is different from their official language. It's their ancient language that ordinary people can't grasp. It's only used by the royal family, the nobles, and the temple. Therefore, we don't have enough samples and can't analyze it for the time being. Furthermore, this language involves some very complicated things. When they use this language, a strange magnetic field will appear. This will take a longer time to analyze. Forget it. No matter what they are planning. The base is ready. The commander relaxed his brows. He hoped that everything would go smoothly. It was said that the demons were in the base and should be able to contend against the 8-arm race members. The commander was more concerned about his family and would be able to see them soon. Half an hour later, with a slight vibration, everyone in the command hall cheered. They were finally home. Inform the envoys of the 8-arm race. Although the commander hadn't completely relaxed, he wasn't as tense as before. At the large space station outside the node, everyone and the spacecraft had been inspected to prevent the microorganisms from the Horn Dragon galaxy from being brought to Earth. Otherwise, they would have to go through 2 weeks of quarantine before they could go home. However, they only needed to settle everything in 3 days before they could go on vacation. As the door of the spacecraft opened, Rinpochen looked at the honor guards in formal attire lining up on both sides of the red carpet. This gave him a sense of déjà vu when he watched the news broadcasts of various heads of state visiting. It seems like there should be flowers at this time, Rinpochen thought. Then he saw 4 beautiful women selected from various countries standing at the bottom of the gangway with flowers in their hands. Rinpochen had a strange expression on his face. He didn't know who had arranged this welcoming ceremony. Aiming nuclear bombs and 100 electromagnetic cannons at this place is a better way to express the goodwill of humans than flowers, Rinpochen said softly with a smile. His voice wasn't loud, but it was just loud enough for the people around him to hear. The others acted as if they didn't hear anything. There were high-level officials from various countries here. Even if they weren't the top few, who would dare to aim nuclear bombs at this place? A few experts came out first. They were all real experts who were responsible for communicating with the 8-armed race. Then they saw a few tall figures of women with arms that looked like the 1,000-armed Guanyin. They are here. The envoys of the various countries made preparations to welcome the extraterrestrial guests. Suddenly, a ripple seemed to explode in the air, and a huge amount of energy exploded in front of them. From the Ba-arm race's envoys, there seemed to be energy pillars that reached the sky. A huge pressure came from the front, causing people to lower their heads and not dare to look directly at them. Bastard. Everyone had the same thought in their minds. What are they going to do? Everyone tried their best to straighten their spines and necks, wanting to look directly at the other party. They were the top group of people on Earth, and they represented humanity. No one wanted to bow down to the extraterrestrial guests. However, the huge difference in strength made every bone in their bodies groan. If the other party had the intention to kill, at least half of the people present would have exploded and died under this huge pressure. Fortunately, another huge aura erupted from the crowd at this time, reducing the pressure brought by the 8-armed race's envoys by more than half. The Empress, who was dressed in red, sneered with a cold look in her eyes as she strode forward. These damned foreign races. Although the Empress didn't mind being used as a weapon when there were benefits, she wouldn't be so proactive. However, these envoys from the 8-armed race reminded her of the damned foreign races outside the wall of the two world. She thought about the battle that had just ended. She thought about the people who had died. This gave her the urge to slap the other party to death. Streaks of barbaric and wild patterns appeared on the Empress's body. A few tall figures followed the Empress and walked out from the crowd. Their faces were filled with malevolent, murderous intent. These ancient race experts, who were like savages, exploded the moment their auras collided. Die. The expert from the 8-armed race, who was standing in front of the gangway, exclaimed in surprise. Chapter 1230. The aura of the Empress was like a sharp sword that pierced through the mountain-like aura of the people from the 8-armed race, greatly reducing the pressure on the rest of the people. At the same time, the people from the 8-armed race were astonished. The humans have such experts? The expressions of the people from the 8-armed race changed, and they looked gloomy. If the humans had such experts, they wouldn't be able to use many of their tricks. But how was that possible? After interacting with the 8-armed race for a few months, they could tell that the humans didn't have any experts through their actions and words. Especially when the experts from the 8-armed race demonstrated their strength, the humans' shock and disbelief weren't a lie. This convinced them that the strength of the 8-armed race and above was beyond the reach of an individual human and even beyond their knowledge. From their observations, ordinary humans weren't even comparable to the children of the 8-armed race. The experts among the humans were only equivalent to the 4-armed members of the 8-armed race, which could be achieved as long as they reached adulthood. The various performances made the 8-armed race believe that although the humans had advanced technology that they didn't have, the humans were naturally weak and had low individual strength. They possessed powerful weapons and technology, but their actual strength was weak. This kind of race inevitably gave them some ideas. Just like children with guns, although dangerous, their threat would be greatly reduced as long as they weren't given a chance to attack. Furthermore, these children had a huge amount of wealth that made people drool. Of course, the 8-armed race wasn't as rude and vicious as the Thunder Barbarians, and they weren't as arrogant as the Thunder Barbarians. What they wanted was to get what they wanted at the lowest cost, especially those technologies that they coveted, spaceships, crew members that helped them operate the spaceships, and other things that they were interested in. As such, they were prepared to display their strength as soon as they got off the spaceship and see how the humans would respond. However, they didn't expect to encounter humans who could rival them as soon as they arrived on Earth. And they weren't alone. The lady in red at the front seemed to have an aura similar to that of the third priest and was one step away from the ancestral reversion realm. The people behind her were slightly weaker, but they were also at the blood birth realm. The third priest's expression changed. The queens and the high priest had guessed wrongly. There were actually experts among the humans. This was going to be troublesome. If they hadn't provoked them earlier, they would naturally be able to communicate peacefully. However, they first released their auras and pressured the humans with their auras. They couldn't hold back now. The third priest was muttering to himself. The rest of the people had withdrawn their auras and focused on the Empress. Both parties were at loggerheads. At this moment, the Empress leaped tens of meters into the air without saying a word. Her snow-white fist appeared out of thin air, and everyone seemed to see a gigantic fist that was tens of meters in size appear in the air. Like a cannonball, it blasted toward the Empress. The expressions of everyone at the back changed drastically. Everyone was grateful that this great demon had stepped forward to stop the ill-intentioned Ba Pai people. Even the Americans who had half of the city destroyed by her felt the same way. However, no one expected that she would brazenly make a move without saying a word. The foreign ambassadors had just arrived on Earth and hadn't even gotten off the spaceship. Without saying a single word, she had already made her move. This was too ferocious. It was too barbaric. It was too satisfying. When it came to scheming, and fighting for benefits, humans were not weaker than any other race. Just now, the 8-arm race had used their aura to suppress everyone. Everyone only needed to think a bit to understand their intentions. Although everyone felt that it was a little rude to see the Empress making a move, they were happy to teach the 8-armed race a lesson. How dare you? A member of the 8-arm race with a greenish-gray metallic sheen on his arms leaped into the air. As he waved his 8 arms, a huge greenish-gray flower bloomed in the air like a lotus platform. This lotus-like flower didn't look eye-catching, but it was extremely dangerous. Those who were close to it could feel a gust of wind brushing past their faces, leaving behind a bloody scar. The moment the gigantic fist in the air touched the edge of the lotus platform, it was as if it was cut by a knife. In the air, the patterns on the Empress's body became denser and covered almost all of her exposed skin. Her aura rose again and again, and she charged into the lotus platform with large strides. Boom! The two of them separated in the air as soon as they came into contact. The lotus platform disappeared, and a figure shot out and crashed directly into the spaceship. The fist that was tens of meters in size in the air was frightening. It gathered all of its strength in one place and didn't release it at all. This was what it was like to hit someone. The Empress stood in the air and looked down at the Ba Pai people's ambassadors. She stared coldly at one of the 8-armed women in a long robe with a faint golden metallic sheen. The third priest looked up and saw that the victor had been decided in one move. The third priest already knew that he was the only one who could stop the Empress. All of you stand down. The third priest said as everyone walked out from the back. She was holding a long staff with both hands. The people beside her bowed and revealed the 8 long knives on their backs. The third priest could reach out and pull them out. The battle between the Empress and the third priest was about to start at any moment. Everyone could feel the killing intent in the air. At this moment, everyone heard a loud, Hey, can you hear me? Are you here to fight? Or is this your etiquette? The Ba Pai people. The sound was as sharp and ear-piercing as metal scraping against each other, almost piercing their eardrums. Everyone wanted to cover their ears when they heard this sound. They turned around and saw a bald man holding a megaphone that was more than 3 meters long. The higher-ups of the various countries were at a loss. Where did this megaphone come from? Isn't this human etiquette? The third priest turned around and looked at Rinpoche as his voice rang in everyone's ears. Your Chinese is not bad. You know the whole story. If this continues, we will think that the Ba Pai people are here to demonstrate their might and want to provoke a war with the humans. All the people from the Ba Pai people glared at Rinpoche. The third priest's eyes were also filled with coldness. The eyes of the leaders of the various countries twitched. Old Li looked at Rinpoche and then at the people from the Ba Pai people who had yet to disembark from the spaceship. Inform everyone to prepare for battle. Put down the flowers and pick up your weapons. The Americans almost jumped up when they heard this. However, before they could finish, they were stopped by the man in the middle. Shut up, Brown. If they want war, we will give them war. Of course, everyone knew that this was impossible, but they still had to show their attitude. The people from the other countries pondered for a while and didn't speak again. Now humans were on the same side. When he heard the voice behind him, Rinpoche said in a deep voice, "Our goal is peace. We want the intelligent races to develop together and advance hand in hand. This is the common pursuit of all intelligent races. However, if you want war, then we will give you war." Although the third priest didn't fully understand, he realized that everyone's gaze had changed. The human soldiers in the distance dispersed into battle formations and picked up their long-barreled weapons. This is troublesome. The third priest frowned. These humans were tougher than she thought. Most importantly, there were experts among the humans who could compete with them. Their plan couldn't be realized from the start. "Sir." The people from the Ba Pai people behind her drew their weapons and got into a defensive stance. The third priest pressed her arm down and said, "Everyone stop." She then looked up at the Empress and placed her hands on her chest. "We came with goodwill." Chapter 12:31. Gullies appeared on the surface of the sea as if the sea had been cut into several sections. Then the seawater flowed backward, creating huge waves. 100 meters above the sea, two figures were moving so fast that the human eye couldn't keep up with their speed. Only by slowing down the speed by 10 times could one barely see the blurry figures. It was unknown how many pairs of eyes were watching all of this from behind the screen. Many people had shocked expressions on their faces. Looking at all the data, the Empress in red was much stronger than when she was in the United States. The most surprising thing was that the envoy from the 8 Arms race had an energy value of 45,000, but it was now close to 60,000. The Empress in red usually had an energy value of 30,000, but when her body was covered with dark purple patterns, her energy value soared to 60,000 as well. Both of their strengths had increased by a large margin. Many people took pictures of the patterns on the surface of the Empress's skin to study what they contained. These patterns are likely to be something like an energy transmission circuit structure. If we can study it and put it on the surface of the skin, it can increase our strength. Unfortunately, a large number of the patterns are blocked by her clothes. We need those blocked patterns to gain something. A bespectacled man looked obsessively at the patterns on an enlarged picture. He turned his head and looked at the others with anticipation. The others pretended not to hear him. Who would dare to make such a request? They probably wouldn't even have the chance to collect their corpses. Rinpoche sat cross-legged on the beach as the battle between the Empress and the third priest appeared in the air in front of him. More than 20 people from the 8 Arms race stood 100 meters away. Following the intense collision between the two, huge waves exploded on the surface of the sea as if countless bombs were exploding in the water. The two of them separated again after a brief collision, and their figures remained in the air. The color of the Empress's skin was already indistinguishable. It was completely covered in dark purple patterns as if she was possessed. Her eyes were bloodshot and looked like they were about to drip blood. Her red clothes were slightly damaged and there were blood stains on her hands. The staff in the third priest's hand was almost deformed, and only 4 of the 6 sabers were left. Phew! The Empress let out a long breath as the patterns on her body began to recede. She moved her feet and walked toward the beach. This was just a sparring match and it wasn't a fight to the death. If they continued fighting, it would be difficult to stop. This was the 3rd day since the 8 Arms race arrived on Earth. Both sides intended to spar and test each other's skills. After all, strength was strength and combatability was combatability. Take the Earth Spirit Clan for example. Their ability to use their power was very low, and they couldn't compare to humans at the same level. On the other hand, the 8 Armed race's fighting ability wasn't weak. At the same level, they weren't any weaker than humans. The Empress was having a hard time fighting them. It was especially so when the 6 sabers were brandished like a storm of blades. On the other hand, the long staff was both offensive and defensive. How was it? Rinpoche stood up and asked when he saw the Empress land on the beach. Not bad. The Water Empress nodded slightly as a form of praise. Over the years, the Empress had fought with many experts. Her confidence and foresight had been nurtured through countless battles. For them to take the initiative to praise the other party, it was evident that the strength of the 8 Armed race wasn't weak. The envoy this time was only the 3rd High Priest. Above him were two other high priests, many queens and some other experts. In particular, the high priest and the queens were all experts who had taken that step. Even the empress found it difficult to face them head-on. Sure enough, Earth and Dayo can't be connected at all. It's the same as when the heaven-grade weapon was brought over and directly cut off contact with its original owner. Furthermore, that ancestral mark has nothing to do with one's blood chi, Rinpoche said casually. When the empress unleashed her blood chi with all her might, an illusory human figure filled with savagery would appear behind her. As her strength increased, the illusory figure would become more solid and increase her strength to a certain extent. At present, it could increase her strength by at least 15%. However, when she unleashed her full strength on Earth, the illusory figure didn't appear. It was evident that the illusory figure was only related to the world that Dayo was in and had nothing to do with blood chi. That is the mark left by the ancestors of the human race in this world, the Empress said. Rinpoche nodded. According to the Empress, that was a mark left by the ancestors of the human race in this world. When the strength of the human race reached a certain level and activated their blood chi with all their might, that mark would condense. This was something that current technology couldn't understand. Rinpoche turned to look at the Empress. Although her expression was cold, he could see the joy in her eyes and that she was in a good mood due to their familiarity. With her strength, she was already invincible among the human race. Furthermore, she rarely had the opportunity to fight with experts from the foreign races. It was rare for her to meet an opponent who was similar in strength to her. If we establish friendly relations with the eight-armed race, there will be more opportunities to learn from each other in the future. When your majesty improves, you can learn from the queens of the eight-armed race. Rinpoche said. Not bad. The Empress nodded and was in a better mood. Someone was already waiting at the side. After the two parties bade farewell, they took the eight-armed race delegation elsewhere and officially began their visit to Earth. Until now, the eight-armed race still couldn't understand why the Empress, with her strength and bearing, wasn't a member of the upper echelons of the human race. In their opinion, the leader of a race was usually the strongest person in the race. However, humans were completely different. The higher-ups of the human race that they saw were all very weak. Rinpoche felt that this was normal. In his opinion, in the absence of external enemies, the higher the level of civilization, the lower the value of individual strength. After leaving the base, Rinpoche and the Empress went to another laboratory to conduct a test on the Earth Spirit. The results were as expected. When the Earth Spirit died on Earth, the electromagnetic waves dispersed by 10 meters before dissipating. They didn't disappear into thin air like they did in Dayo. It was as if they had entered another space and were sent back after their bodies recovered. It was like uploading and downloading data. On Earth, the electromagnetic waves would disperse after traveling for 30 feet, just like ordinary electromagnetic waves, before finally dissipating. At the same time, the physical recovery ability of the Earth Spirit also disappeared. It was a little unexpected, but it was also reasonable. Rinpoche reckoned that it was because the life form they shared wasn't in the same world, so they couldn't transmit life force. After obtaining the results of the experiment, Rinpoche was even more interested in the deity of the Earth Spirit. Whether it was life-sharing or divine sense, soul, they could be transmitted and received just like uploading and downloading data. If he could crack this ability, he would be able to create an immortal body. Rinpoche thought about it. Even if he could crack the uploading and downloading ability of divine sense, he could use cloning technology to directly replace the body and create an immortal body. Furthermore, he wouldn't have to worry about being captured and tortured to death like the Earth Spirit. Rinpoche felt excited at the thought of this, but the biggest problem was how to capture the deity of the Earth Spirit. Based on the deity's ability to break through space, it was impossible to capture him. Chapter 1232. In Rinpoche's Sea of Knowledge, there was a planet that was green but had no vitality. A towering Buddha statue that reached the clouds sat on the ground. The face of the Buddha statue looked 70% similar to Rinpoche's. There was a five-colored luster around it that was constantly changing. Rinpoche's figure floated in front of the head of the Buddha statue, nodding his head as he looked at his work. To practice this wish concentration technique, one had to condense a statue of a deity with the power of the 5 elements in the Sea of Knowledge. According to the ancient scroll of methods, the 5 elements were formed in the Sea of Knowledge, and then the statue of a deity was condensed from the 5 elements. Rinpoche knew very well that his cultivation was different from others. He had shrunk his sea of knowledge into a singularity and then exploded it to create a universe. This was the result of his previous studies and the understanding of the universe that he had obtained. If others didn't have this knowledge, it would be impossible to have such a universe, let alone form a planet. After all, the formation of each person's sea of knowledge was related to their knowledge of the world. The sea of knowledge of others was either chaotic with the 5 elements or a small world, and the statue that condensed would occupy most of the sea of knowledge. However, Rinpoche was different. The universe in his sea of knowledge was too big. If he wanted to erect a statue that occupied most of the world in the universe, he didn't know how long it would take. After thinking for a long time, he simply condensed such a Buddha statue on a planet. Presumably, this statue was about the same size as the predecessors. The condensation of this statue was only the first step. It was just an empty frame made of clay and wood. Next, he had to use the power of the sea of knowledge to nurture this statue and bring it to life step by step until it became a seed. Then he could proceed to the next step, which was to cut it out and connect it with incense. It would receive worship throughout the 4 seasons and become a deity. The most difficult thing for others was to accumulate incense, but it was the easiest for Rinpoche. The only problem was that it required time. In the situation of ruling a country, Rinpoche didn't lack any external things. I don't know if this deity can make a wish, such as growing some hair. Rinpoche touched his bald head and felt that it felt pretty good. It was as smooth as a mirror. Hair didn't matter much, but the rest was a big worry for him. Vultures didn't look good. Then he went to another planet to take a look. The land of the planet was densely packed with stone tablets. It was like a forest of tablets. At a glance, there were hundreds of thousands or even millions of them. Every stone tablet was equivalent to a book. Rinpoche would flip through the books and record them every time he returned to Earth. It didn't take much time to record a book. These stone tablets included all aspects of his life and were his most important savings. Even if he were to be trapped in Dayo one day and never be able to return to Earth, these stone tablets would be enough to support the foundation of Dayo's technology and develop it to a certain level. After coming out of his sea of knowledge, he smelled the Empress's fragrance and hugged her. In terms of height, Rinpoche was only 5 centimeters taller than the Empress. Both of them looked about the same when they stood side by side. In terms of body size, Rinpoche could fit 3 of her. However, the Empress could defeat 8 of them with a single finger. For the next few days, he nurtured the statue and practiced the use of the 5 elements. He was able to manifest the power of the 5 elements before attaining the spirit wheel level, but he was clumsy in his operation. Now that he could communicate with heaven and earth through his sea of knowledge, his control of the 5 elements had increased tremendously. Even though he couldn't command them as if they were his own arms, he could use a lot more techniques and play some tricks. For example, the 5 Fireball sect. Rinpoche felt that he had finally become the tall, rich and handsome mage of his dreams. A mage who was 175 meters tall and weighed 150 kilograms was a beautiful sight to behold. Other than that, he would return to Earth with the Empress from time to time to participate in the meetings between the various countries and the diplomatic group of the 8 Arms race. The various countries were still wary of the 8 Arms race, and the Empress would usually be present during the meetings. When facing the aliens, the people of Earth were united. However, the various countries were also cautious. For example, the United States seemed to have had many contacts with the diplomatic group of the 8 Arms race in private. Their intentions were easy to guess. More than 20 years ago on Earth, the former Rinpoche, the Empress, and a few others defeated a large country. Even the president at that time was pushed out as a scapegoat. Such a humiliation wouldn't be easily forgotten even after more than 20 years had passed. Rinpoche simply looked on coldly from the sidelines. No matter what intentions they had, there were only a few people in the 8 Arms race who could pose a threat to the Empress, and the United States was close at hand. Rinpoche was more concerned about the progress of the multi-party negotiations. Earth would provide technological support to the 8 Arms race, including but not limited to industrial, agricultural, smelting and medical resources as well as the training of some talents. The most important point was that Earth would provide the 8 Arms race with a portion of their spaceships and train their talents. In the eyes of the 8 Arms race, they would be able to attack and defend with spaceships, and they could even use them to travel to Earth. Rinpoche could only say that they knew nothing about technology. Not to mention anything else, there would definitely be a backdoor in the control system of their spaceships. Without specific data, they wouldn't even be able to find the location of the nodes. However, what they had obtained so far was enough to satisfy the 8 Arms race. Correspondingly, the Eight Arms race would mark out an area on Moros, the mother planet of their language, allow Earth to build a city there, and provide some resources from Moros. In addition, the Eight Arms race would also send experts to attack the four-leaf clover planet together with Earth. This was also something that Earth valued greatly. Both the four-leaf clover planet and Moros had many resources that were extremely useful to Earth. In addition, the vitality on these two planets was much more abundant than on Earth, and the upper limit for cultivation was also much higher. As long as they could gain a foothold in the Horn Dragon Galaxy, Earth would be able to train a large number of powerful warriors. Earth's current target was the continent that they had previously occupied on the four-leaf clover planet. Its area wasn't much smaller than the American continent, and China would be able to obtain 1/3 of China's land there. Rinpoche would be able to obtain 80,000 square kilometers of land, which was equivalent to half of Yu province. Nominally, this land still belonged to China, but in fact, it was equivalent to private territory. Whether it was building a city or mining resources on it, the country wouldn't interfere too much. It seemed like Rinpoche had gained a great advantage, but in fact, the gains weren't that great. After all, the distance between Earth and the Horn Dragon Galaxy was too far, and transportation was difficult. Not only would it take a lot of time, but it would also require a huge investment of funds and resources. It could be said that the desired results might not be achieved within a few decades. Moreover, Rinpoche had to pay a price for this land. However, these were all acceptable to Rinpoche. The distance between the two galaxies was long and transportation was difficult, but it wasn't a big problem for Rinpoche. Now, he only needed 1.5 days to travel between the two worlds and could completely transport some of the aboriginals there for development. He could also use this as a backup plan. More importantly, he could also train some experts here. In Dayo, Rinpoche could make a round trip in 2 days. Each trip, Rinpoche could carry more than 1,000 kilograms. If the weight wasn't too high, he could carry 10 people at a time. If they were from the Yun Nation or the Jing tribe, Rinpoche could even carry 20 people. In a year, Rinpoche could make 180 round trips, which was equivalent to 2,000 to 3,000 people. Rinpoche had already made plans to choose talented warriors. Coupled with natural reproduction, Dayo would have tens of thousands of warriors and tens of thousands of children in a few years. Moreover, the flow of time between the two sides was different. When the next war started, he might be able to harvest a batch of Cardinal Heaven or even Immortal Heaven warriors. The only limitation is power, Rinpoche said to the Empress. However, there was nothing he could do about this. Power wasn't a specialty in the spiritual sense cultivation system. If I had the power of your majesty, I might really be able to create an army. The Empress thought for a while and said, according to records, there are some medicines that can increase strength. Although they are rare, they aren't non-existent. When you return, let Shiwanya pass on my decree. Every village will find medicines that can increase strength and hand them over. There will be some gains. In addition, there are many body-strengthening techniques that can increase strength. I will watch you practice them. Rinpoche touched his shiny forehead. He had to practice again. In the blink of an eye, half a year had passed on Earth. The Eight Arms race had a certain understanding of Earth, and the discussions between the two sides were almost over. Half of the Eight Arms race delegation would stay on Earth while the other half would return to their home planet. After all, the details of the discussion still needed the approval of the many queens of the Eight Arms race. In general, both sides had no objections. At most, they would make some changes in the details. At the same time, Earth was also busy preparing for the upcoming colonial war. At the same time, Rinpoche was also making various preparations. Chapter 1233. Master, do you want a Lolita who knows how to act cute, warm the bed, and is soft and easy to push? No, I want a child. Rinpoche calmly turned his head and looked behind him. Honeysuckle didn't follow him. After all, a father still cared about his reputation. The Lolita in the swimsuit turned pale with fright and immediately turned gray with a row of vertical stripes. Cut the crap and give me the combination of martial arts. Rinpoche pulled a chair over and sat down. In the past half a month, he had people input most of the martial arts into the super brain 24 hours a day. The super brain analyzed the combination of martial arts that could increase one's strength the most and wouldn't conflict with each other. In fact, most of the books in the palace and the academy had already been inputted into the library, and they were still being collected over the years. This was equivalent to an update. Wild boar with no sense of aesthetics. The Lolita muttered. the Corpse and Ghost Scroll, Heaven Seal Technique, and Blood Flame Saber. The combination of these three martial arts can increase one's strength by 1,300 kilograms. The 10 Ultimate Books, Earth-Shocking Book, and Army-Breaking Fist. The combination of these three martial arts can increase one's strength by 1,600 kilograms. The Roaring Tiger Fist, Salvation Chart, Tyrannical Viper Technique, and Snake Scorpion Poison Technique. The combination of these four martial arts can increase one's strength by 1,700 kilograms. The Lolita listed more than a dozen martial arts combinations that Rinpoche could practice. It didn't take long to increase one's strength by 1,000 to 2,000 kilograms. They were all combinations of 3 to 4 martial arts. Any more and they would affect each other and the benefits wouldn't be great. The martial arts might even conflict with each other. Many of these martial arts required precious medicinal baths, but this didn't matter to Rinpoche. Rinpoche took the list from the printer at the side. The names on it were all very cool. As for the actual effect, it wasn't bad. After all, the main effect of most martial arts wasn't to increase one's strength. Strength was just a side effect. For example, the Corpse and Ghost Scroll. After practicing, one would become ghostly and inhuman. However, one's body was extremely hard and could withstand swords and knives. After reaching the Spirit Wheel level, the Heaven Seal Technique could condense heaven-grade weapons and freeze people. Although one couldn't move as long as someone cooperated, they could easily kill an expert of the same level. Rinpoche listened to the little Lolita's analysis of the advantages and disadvantages of various martial arts combinations and finally chose the 10 Ultimate Books, Earth-Shocking Book, and the combination of the Army-Breaking Fist. However, this was where his advantage lay. With the support of sufficient resources, it was not difficult to cultivate the 10 Ultimate Books and the Earth-Shaking Tome. However, the last technique, the Army-Shattering Fist, required the tempering of life and death on the battlefield in order to progress quickly. This gave Rinpoche a headache. If it was just a battlefield, they could just start a war. However, if they needed to be tempered by life and death situations, then only the outsiders could do so. Fortunately, after practicing the other two martial arts, he would be able to have 1,100 pounds of strength. In the future, he would see if he could use the other martial arts to replace the regiment-shattering fist. The order to collect all kinds of natural treasures that could increase one's strength had been sent to all the villages in the 60,000 mountains. The Protectorate of the South had even sent a group of experts to search the dangerous areas. It was easy to cultivate in the government, not to mention that he was in control of a country and had the support of a country. 3 days later, Rinpoche couldn't laugh anymore. The Empress sat on a chair and watched the television dramas from the past 20 years. She held a bowl of sorghum wine in one hand and a whip in the other. One of the eyes saw that Rinpoche's movements were slightly slower, and the whip broke through the air and lashed at the side of Rinpoche's feet. The 20-centimeter thick flagstone immediately turned into powder. Soon after, he heard the sound of the air exploding. This was the sound of the whip breaking through the sound barrier. The corners of Rinpoche's eyes twitched. Practice. The Empress looked at Rinpoche with one eye and watched the television drama with the other. Rinpoche was speechless. Your Majesty, one of your eyes is on the left and the other on the right. It's as if you were hit by the 7 wounds fist. Pop. This time the whip really hit him. When Rinpoche practiced the yang boosting technique, he lost all his hair and became bald, but he was also invulnerable. However, after this whip hit him, a bloody scar immediately appeared on his body. The area around the wound was like a crack after metal had been split open. Hiss. Rinpoche recalled that run under the setting sun, the youth that had passed away, and the 8-year-old little girl from more than 20 years ago. Fortunately, no one saw it. It had to be said that the Empress's character was extremely good in some aspects. Knowing that Rinpoche would be beaten today, she didn't even leave anyone to serve him. This was more or less saving him some face. Rinpoche continued to immerse himself in his boxing practice. Every day he would handle affairs in the morning, practice boxing in the afternoon, and nurture the statue at night. Half a month later there was good news. 3 fruits that could increase one's strength were found in the 60,000 mountains. These rare treasures were rare, but they weren't impossible to obtain. It was just that there wasn't a need for them in the past, and no one had been sent to specifically search for them. Even if someone occasionally found them, they would keep them for themselves. Now that the state had mobilized many experts from the government and many villages in the 60,000 mountains to search together, they quickly found something. The biggest difficulty was that the 60,000 mountains were too big, and most of these rare treasures were in unexplored areas or dangerous places with many ferocious beasts. After all, those that were easy to find had already been eaten. After the 3 earth fruits were found, there was one after another good news. The materials needed to practice the 10 ultimate manuals were finally complete. As a result, the speed at which Rinpoche practiced the 10 ultimate manuals began to soar. After another half a month, the 3 earth fruits were in Rinpoche's hands. They were 3 fist-sized fruits that looked like persimmons and gave off a faint smell of rotten eggs. It was said that according to the strength and potential of the person who consumed it, each fruit could increase one's strength by 100 to 200 kilograms. The higher the strength, the less the increase. The greater the physical potential, the more the increase. The 3 fruits increased his strength by 150 kilograms, which made Rinpoche understand that he deserved to be a tall, rich, and handsome magician. As a result, the Empress asked someone to design a series of programs to nourish his body and increase its potential. After all, although many medicines wouldn't increase his strength, they could nourish the body and increase its potential. However, after eating these 3 earth fruits, Rinpoche's practice of the 10 ultimate manuals sped up a little. The earth spirit people have all left the barrier between the 2 worlds. These fellows are really a scourge. Wherever they go, there are no rats or grass left. Rinpoche clicked his tongue as he looked at the pictures that were transmitted back to him. Everything had been eaten. Fortunately, these foreign races were strong and they had brought some special food with them. 1 grain was enough to last them for a day. If it were an ordinary army, they would starve to death on the way, not to mention being harassed by ferocious beasts. However, there are also benefits. The Protectorate of the South can advance along the route that the Earth Spirit people took. All the ferocious beasts along the way have been cleared. Inform the Protectorate of the South that they can mobilize the army and rebuild the forward operating camp at the barrier between the 2 worlds. Their food is full of vitality, which is why 1 grain can last for a day. This is something we can't do. We can only transport large amounts of supplies to the barrier by plane. However, the areas that have been cleared by the Earth Spirit people will soon be occupied by new flying beasts. Because the flying beasts have a large range of activity and have no natural enemies, they will quickly move to this area. Even if there is no food, it will become their territory. In this way, a large number of troops will be needed to clear the flying beasts near this long supply line, Rinpoche said. This was a difficult problem. To clear such a long supply line, not only would a large number of experts be needed, but they would also need more supplies, which would put more pressure on the logistics. What do you think? The Empress looked at him. Expand the army and increase taxes, Rinpoche said after some thought. After all, it took money to support an army and logistics supplies. Although there were many ways for the imperial court to earn money, the Aboriginal army ate too much. The cost of maintaining an Aboriginal army of 100,000 soldiers was equivalent to maintaining an ordinary army of at least 500,000. At present, there were more than 150,000 Aboriginal soldiers, which was equivalent to an army of 750,000. In addition, it was difficult to resupply in the 60,000 mountains, and the annual military expenditure was much higher than that of a 1,000,000-strong army. One had to know that there were more than 10 million Aboriginals, and the people of the Yun Nation and the Jing tribe only had about 100 million people. With the productivity of this era, 100 million people supporting a 1,000,000-strong army could be considered a militaristic act. Moreover, if they wanted to expand the army again and maintain this supply line, they would need a large number of soldiers. Upon hearing this, the Empress frowned. Rinpoche then said something else, which made her frown relax a little. However, the additional taxes can be made up by the Qin Nation, Great Xia, and the Imperial Court. It can also be called tributes. The Imperial Court was the country established by the revolutionary army that Su Qing was in, and it was opposite Great Xia across the river. The Empress immediately made a decision after hearing this. Whether they agreed or not wasn't important. First, set a small goal such as 1 second. Chapter 1234. Something big had happened in the capital of the Qin Nation recently. It was a top priority for the upper echelons and aristocrats of the Qin Nation. The Princess of Deyo was sent to the Qin Nation as an envoy. Women in this world didn't have much status. Apart from marriage, it was unheard of for a princess to go on a diplomatic mission. However, with the presence of the Empress and the fact that the Empress only had 1 son, Even though it was strange for a princess to go on a diplomatic mission, it wasn't unacceptable. Furthermore, it wasn't a secret that the princess was one of the top experts in the world. She was born with the strength of an earth wheel expert. She was only 17 years old, but she was already a cardinal heaven expert, which was equivalent to a spirit wheel expert. She would be one of the top experts in any country and could even meet the king. Coupled with her status as a princess and the strength of Dayo, it went without saying that the Qin nation attached great importance to this. The commoners probably didn't have much to do with it, and most of them didn't even care. All they thought about every day was how to fill their stomachs. Most people didn't leave a radius of 150 kilometers from birth to death, so they naturally didn't know anything about Dayo. Of course, it wasn't that they didn't know anything. At least, the various utensils that Dayo sold were very expensive, such as mirrors, glass, porcelain, spices, clocks, and cars. Although it was rare, cars could still be seen in the capital of the Qin nation. Nothing represented the status of the rich and the aristocrats better than these things. Unlike the ordinary people in Dayo who could drive tractors everywhere, the high cost of sending caravans to buy diesel and transport it back made it difficult for anyone except the truly rich to afford it. However, it was precisely because of this that cars were more sought after. The rarer something was, the better it was. Only the rarest and most expensive cars were the best. Moreover, a trip with these things would at least attract a lot of attention. As a result, Dayo, which originally gave people the impression of being barren and poor, was now synonymous with mystery and power in the eyes of many. This was especially true for the upper echelons of the Qin nation, who really understood the situation abroad. In addition to envy and awe of Dayo's power, there were all kinds of indescribable feelings in their hearts. 20 years ago Dayo was indeed poor. They didn't have sharp weapons, exquisite silk, or anything beautiful. They only relied on a group of unruly people who committed murder, arson, and robbery, which made the Qin nation, the Yun nation, and Great Xia look down on them. However, with the emergence of one person, the development of Dayo over the past 20 years had been advancing in a tyrannical manner. All kinds of exquisite items, all kinds of wonderful products that people couldn't stop praising, came out of the desert of that civilization. Telephones that could communicate thousands of miles away, lifelike street projections, ironclad warships on the water, and even giant steel eagles that could fly in the sky. Today the Yun nation had perished and was turned into the Yun residence by Dayo. Great Xia was split into two and could no longer take care of Dayo. The state of Qin shrank in a corner, burying its head in the soil. On the surface, it was singing and dancing to celebrate peace, but behind the scenes, it was unknown how many knowledgeable people were unable to sleep. On this day the white-haired prime minister of the state of Qin went 5 kilometers outside the city to welcome them. Although in the eyes of many people, this was destroying their prestige, this proposal was opposed by many people as soon as it was put forward. This was especially true for the arrogant Qin nobles who indulged in pleasure. Mu Wu shook his head and sighed inwardly as he recalled the words of those people in the hall. Some people hadn't opened their eyes to take a good look at the world for a long time. At this point they could already see the troops coming from afar. The people of the Yun nation were at the front and back, and the Jianlong army was at the northwest to avoid colliding with them. In the middle was the group of envoys, which included 500 guards and some attendants. Although there were only 500 of them, they were the most powerful force under the Empress, the winged cavalry. Every one of them was at the earth wheel level. Even though there were only 500 of them, they could contend with 5,000 people or even more. No one dared to underestimate them. The troops stopped in front of them, and the Jianlong army in front of them spread out and entered the city from the sides. The middle army slowly stopped, and Mu Wu sent someone to report their identity in a very humble manner. After a while they saw a young lady sitting on a horse, trying her best to look dignified and serious. Although Honeysuckle tried her best to look dignified and serious, her eyes were wandering and unconsciously looking at everything that she found interesting, except for the group of people in front of her and the old man. Why did I come here? What does this have to do with me? Honeysuckle couldn't help but think of this question. She had no interest in the affairs of the imperial court at all. She just loved to play. She relied on her fists to recruit sons everywhere. She recruited monks, Taoist nuns, experts with bad connections, and murderers to form a band. She was even preparing to shoot a movie. However, as soon as she brought up this idea, her father, doubtfully, kicked her to this barren country that had no sense of existence. Honeysuckle was daydreaming and simply didn't pay attention to what the old man in front of her said. She continued until someone coughed heavily behind her. Mu Wu. Greetings, Princess of Dayo. Mu Wu repeated as if nothing had happened, and then introduced the officials around him. Princess, you must have had a long journey. Why don't you follow me into the city and rest for a day? In fact, Mu Wu came to see who the main envoy was. He wanted to invite the other party into the carriage for a chat and sound out the other party's intentions. However, at this moment, the others were behind this princess. It seemed that this princess was the one in charge, so it wasn't appropriate to rashly invite her. He wasn't afraid of an old man inviting a young lady into the carriage for a chat. It seemed that it was easier to get information out of that person, but he was afraid that the 500 winged cavalry warriors would chop him up. Don't think that they couldn't do it. The barbarians of Dayo were famous for not playing their cards according to common sense and for turning hostile and chopping people up at any time. More than 10 years ago, being sent to Dayo as an envoy every year was almost a matter of life and death. It was only because the empress lived in seclusion and cultivated her character that the number of envoys killed over the past 10 years didn't exceed 3. Mu Wu came out of the city to welcome the princess and the Jianlong army entered the city. Everyone naturally knew that the princess had arrived. Many people in the city waited anxiously by the roadside and got what they wished for. They saw the naive and unaffected princess of Dayo sitting on the back of a horse and looking around curiously. There were also hundreds of ferocious-looking bald men who were covered in blood looking around with threatening gazes. Honeysuckle was a little disappointed along the way into the city. The capital of the Qin nation looked lackluster. In terms of extravagance, it was much worse than Wangjing. In terms of grandeur, it was far inferior to the imperial capital. However, when they arrived at the Ministry of Rites, Honeysuckle was still full of energy and wanted to go out for a stroll. However, he was stopped by someone. After all, he was on a diplomatic mission and couldn't go out and cause trouble the moment he landed. Fortunately, he could look forward to the state banquet that night. Qin Ziong from the Qin family of Jiangnan pays his respects to the Princess of Dayo. Just as he arrived at the entrance of the palace, he unexpectedly met a nobleman with a powdered face who thought he was good. Honeysuckle blinked his eyes and looked at Qin Ziong, who was gorgeously dressed like a peacock spreading its tail. Bright and clear like the light clouds covering the moon, fluttering like the flowing snow in the returning wind. This poem is most suitable to describe your highness, Qin Ziong recited leisurely. He then shook his head and recited, round and round, glossy and jade-like. Full of words, breath like orchids. Gorgeous and graceful, makes me forget to eat. One had to know that the husband of the empress wasn't a citizen of Dayo and was weak and powerless. With this precedent, it was unknown how many noblemen wanted to win the princess's smile. The first to appear was naturally the strongest. Honeysuckle continued to blink his eyes and looked at the peacock in front of him while reciting the poem and hitting his palm with his fan. After pondering for a long time and being influenced by various books and movies on Earth, he finally understood one thing. This guy wants to flirt with me? Honeysuckle, who realized the other party's intention, widened his eyes. Should he follow the usual practice and beat him up or scold him before beating him up? Damn it, shameless. Many people who were watching from afar cursed in their hearts. Qin Ziong saw that Honeysuckle's expression had a reaction and was delighted. He thought to himself that this guy was indeed from the barbarian lands. Just reciting a few lines of poetry was enough to make the other party lose control. Then everything went black. As if he was hit by a hammer, his head swung back heavily and his entire body flew out. First set a small goal, for example 1 second. Remember, Scholars Residence. You're tuning in to the Han Lee's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.